I'll support you.
Hello today on this fine Sunday, June 7th? Is it June? Is it June? It's the 6th month June. I'm always bad at figuring that stuff out. Hello, hey Aggro. And Zach, thank you for resubscribing. Welcome back to the fold. Oh, Melody, hello. Nice to see you. And DJ, STL, Harvest, CC, hello. As you guys know, hopefully, we're here to read from the book How to Be an Anti-Racist for book club today. So, unfortunately, I don't have a free PDF to offer people because this book is still under copyright and you can and should support the artist. But hopefully, if there's any points that anybody's going to need me to clarify while we're reading, we can go back and do that. That's my hope. That's my hope. But before we get into that, how is everybody? How is everybody today? I feel like a big announcement just happened, so I'm still kind of like reeling from that. Hey, thank you for resubscribing, Aggro. Welcome back to the fold. I'm just a huge mixture of emotions today. Much better than yesterday. That's great. What happened? The Minneapolis City Council just agreed to disband the police in Minneapolis. That just happened. So That happened like roughly maybe like what 45 minutes ago or so. I'm just still, yeah, it is very fresh news, and I'm like still floored, still trying to think for myself. Thank you for the host, Melody. Still trying to overcome my feelings as we're waiting for other people to trickle in today. But yeah, so that's a thing that happened. I have to say, this whole period of time, right, Zach? This whole period of time has been like really eye-opening for me in terms of things that I believed, that I didn't know that I believed couldn't happen. You know what I mean? How does one be an antichrist? I cannot help you there. I know pretty much nothing about... Is that Christianity? Or is that... What is that just I don't know. I don't know. I can't help you there. I'm guessing you just do all of the things that the church doesn't want you to do. That's my guess. That's my guess. But God, I really cannot speak. It's amazing how much, even though I was raised outside of the church beliefs sure do shape like our general American culture so much. You know what I mean? So I'm just gonna take a few deep breaths because I'm still rattled by that thing. I actually yesterday I went out to the Seattle protests. I went out to the Seattle protest yesterday, and I went out to the protests. Oh, Cece, that is a whole thing that there is a lot of information about. I recommend looking into Defund the Police. Defund the Police is like a movement, and they have proposed solutions for what to do in lieu of the police. And there's like lots of them, from like expanding emergency medical care and emergency like mental health workers and things like that. It's like a whole thing, and a lot of it is evidence-based. So I super recommend looking into that. I know. I went out to the protests in Seattle yesterday. We got there right as the police started using flashbangs and pepper spray. They were like riding on bikes around people, pepper spraying them in the face. We were not like immediately there next to the action. We were still heading down there, and we were seeing people like coming back from this mess, and like seeing people try to reorganize and regroup after this all had happened. But I just want to say it feels kind of like being in yes. Yes, they did, but what was left out of the headlines was that the Seattle Police Department doesn't have tear gas, but the SWAT team / National Guard is allowed to have tear gas. So many protesters were under the impression that tear gas was not going to be used, and it was used. And nobody had protection, and it was a bad time. And also they were like, there's claims of an explosive being thrown. I don't want to say anything. It's going to get me into trouble. I'm just going to say that the picture that they took of what the explosive apparently was definitely looked like a candle. It definitely looked like it was a candle. And from being there and from everyone that I heard that was there at the time that it happened, when I was there, everybody was peaceful. They were angry. They were very angry about the fact that they had just gotten, like, out of nowhere attacked. But aside from being angry, they were very peaceful. I didn't see anything there that would have warranted that. So that's exciting. Because I threw the explosive. Actually, hey Thomas-san. My smile. White Claws? I'm unsure what White Claws are. Yeah, they've said that things were thrown. We have video evidence of the moment that the riot, the moment that the riot started because the police started attacking protesters. Whoa, my mind's in a space. But the moment that the police started going after protesters, and like from what I could see, the inciting incident was that a sign that a protester was holding fell over, like the crowd was getting a little bit rowdy, and a sign fell over the barricade. And like that's when they were like, all right, boom. So, who is to say what actually happened? We only have video footage of the event. Someone in the Northwest threw cans of White Claws at cops. What is White Claws? I'm gonna look that up real quick. Oh, seltzer? Oh, well, that's not what I thought. K-Alien, thank you for following. Enjoy your apprenticeship here. A sparkling alcoholic drink. Well, that just sounds like they're just trying to take care of the police. You know what I mean? Like, hey, suds up, you know? Get your water up in there. Maybe look a little bit less like a robot. I think that'd be a good move. But yeah, I learned yesterday that I should not go out to protests because I am not physically well enough to go out to the protests. I ended up actually in the backyard of a volunteer who was there to help people with medical issues. I'm fine. I just got hives all over my body. I'm fine, but like protesting is not the thing for me, but that's why we're here to read. That's why we're here to read instead. Listen, I did know that. I just didn't think, like, I thought I would get really tired and I would be like worse off the next day. I didn't think my body was gonna break out in hives. What the hell is that shit? I don't even know how that happened. It's fine. Okay, so I'm pulling out the book. We're gonna get ready to get started on the book. And I'm probably gonna mute the music just because I think if you're not following along with the book, I think it's probably gonna be harder to hear what I'm saying. I'm gonna do my best to enunciate, and if you guys have any questions about anything that I'm saying, please type them in the chat. I'll try to read the chat as I'm going along. And like, we will discuss at the end of every section of reading, and I'll let you know when those sections are. But if there's confusions about, like, I didn't enunciate something properly and you didn't hear it, please let me know so that I can go back and cover that. I'm allergic to the police. Hey, Crethian! The second thing that I wanted to say about this book before we start is that I'm gonna be reading the introduction, a part of chapter 1, and then depending on how much time we have left, either chapter 2 or chapter 8. If you don't have this book, read the whole thing. I'm gonna be skipping around just because there's a limited number of words that I can read aloud before I die, but all of it is very important and provides important context that is useful for understanding what the book is saying. I'm just trying to hit certain points that I think will be like most helpful for the most number of people while we're here. Cheers, Crethian. Thank you. And cheers, STL. And the other thing that I wanted to say, once again, this is going to be just like it was last stream, the last stream that we had, which was very nice. Thank you, guys. Hey, Zach. But we're going to be discussing isms. We're going to be discussing racism, and this book goes into some very interesting points. Now, a lot of these points made perfect sense to me because I am mixed and I grew up kind of understanding racism from like an inside and an outside perspective, kind of. But so if there's anything that's not making sense to you or not clicking, please ask, and I would love to like see if my knowledge will be able to help clarify things for you. I want to say again that all questions, as long as they're good faith questions, as long as you're not coming in here being like, why are black people inferior? Like, all good faith questions are super open. I don't want to see anybody in chat going after anybody else for asking a question and genuinely trying to learn. That's not what we do here. We're not about that. That's counterproductive. It's stupid. We all grew up in this racist system, and we all got to learn how to deprogram ourselves. You know what I mean? So that's the mood and the spirit in this room. We are helping each other learn, and we are unblurring the camera, and we are in a spirit of love and good faith. So no judgment here, please. I do ask, and we will be bopping people if any of that comes on, so just be aware. Why are the cats obvious overlords in society? Because cats are the one species that is superior to every other species on the planet. Duh. Okay. That being said, if you do have the book, we are going to be starting with the My Racist Introduction, which is the introduction to the whole book. As I said, we'll be going through the introduction, chapter 1, or part of chapter 1, chapter 2, and then we'll be skipping down to chapter 8, if we can. So that being said, let us begin reading. My racist introduction. I despised suits and ties. For 17 years, I had been surrounded by suit-wearing, tie-choking, hat-flying church folk. My teenage wardrobe hollered the defiance of a preacher's kit. It was January 17th, 2000. More than 3,000 black people, with a smattering of white folks, arrived that Monday morning in their Sunday best at the Hilton Memorial Chapel in Northern Virginia. My parents arrived in a state of shock. Their floundering son had somehow made it to the final round of the Prince William County Martin Luther King Jr. oratorical contest. I didn't show up with a white collar under a dark suit and matching dark tie like most of my competitors. I sported a racy golden brown blazer with a slick black shirt and bright color-streaked tie underneath. The hem of my baggy black slacks crested over my creamy boots. I'd already failed the test of respectability before I opened my mouth, but my parents, Carol and Larry, were all smiles nonetheless. They couldn't remember the last time they saw me wearing a tie and blazer, however loud and crazy. But it wasn't just my clothes that didn't fit the scene. My competitors were academic prodigies. I wasn't. I carried a GPA lower than 3.0. My SAT score barely cracked 1,000. Colleges were recruiting my competitors. I was riding the high of having received surprise admission letters from the 2 colleges I'd half-heartedly applied to. A few weeks before, I was on the basketball court with my high school team, warming up for a home game, cycling through layup lines. My father, all 6'3" and 200 pounds of him, emerged from my high school gym's entrance. He slowly walked onto the basketball court, flailing his long arms to get my attention, and embarrassing me before what we could call the white judge. Classic Dad. He couldn't care less what judgmental white people thought about him. He rarely, if ever, put on a happy mask, faked a calmer voice, hid his opinion, or avoided making a scene. I loved and hated my father for living on his own terms in a world that usually denies black people their own terms. It was the sort of defiance that could have gotten him lynched by a mob in a different time and place, or lynched by men in badges today. I jogged over to him before he could flail his way right into our layup lines. Weirdly giddy, he handed me a brown manila envelope. "This came for you today." He motioned me to open the envelope right there at half court as the white students and teachers looked on. I pulled out the letter and read it. I had been admitted to Hampton University in Southern Virginia. My immediate shock exploded into unspeakable happiness. I embraced Dad and exhaled, tears mixed with warm-up sweat on my face. The judging white eyes around us faded. I thought I was stupid, too dumb for college. Of course, intelligence is as subjective as beauty, but I kept using objective standards, like test scores and report cards, to judge myself. No wonder I sent out only 2 college applications, one to Hampton and the other to the institution I ended up attending, Florida A&M University. Fewer applications meant less rejection, and I fully expected those 2 historically black universities to reject me. Why would any university want an idiot on their campus who can't understand Shakespeare? It never occurred to me that maybe I wasn't really trying to understand Shakespeare, and that's why I dropped out of my English 2 International Baccalaureate class during my senior year. Then again, I did not read much of anything in those years. Maybe if I'd read history then, I'd have learned about the historical significance of the new town my family had moved to from New York City in 1997. I would have learned about all those Confederate memorials surrounding me in Manassas, Virginia, like Robert E. Lee's Dead Army. I would have learned why so many tourists trekked to Manassas National Battlefield Park to relive the glory of the Confederate victories at the battles of Bull Run during the Civil War. It was there that General Thomas J. Jackson acquired his nickname Stonewall for his stubborn defense of the Confederacy. Northern Virginians kept the Stonewall intact after all these years. Did anyone notice the irony that, at this Martin Luther King Jr. oratorical contest, my free black life represented Stonewall Jackson High School? The delightful event organizers from Delta Sigma Theta sorority, the proud dignitaries, and the competitors were all seated on the pulpit. The group is too large to say we were seated in the pulpit. The audience sat in rows that curved around the long, arched pulpit, giving room for speakers to face to the far sides of the chapel while delivering their talks. 5 stairs also allowed us to descend into the crowd if we wanted. The middle schoolers had given their surprisingly mature speeches, the exhilarating children's choir had sung behind us, the audience sat back down and went silent in anticipation of the 3 high school orators. I went first, finally approaching the climax of an experience that had already changed my life. From winning my high school competition months before to winning Best Before the Judges at a county-wide competition weeks before, I felt a special rainstorm of academic confidence. If I came out of the experience dripping with confidence for college, then I'd entered from a high school drought. Even now I wonder if it was my poor sense of self that first generated my poor sense of my people, or was it my poor sense of my people that inflamed a poor sense of myself? Like the famous question about the chicken and the egg, the answer is less important than the cycle it describes. Racist ideas make people of color think less of themselves, which makes them more vulnerable to racist ideas. Racist ideas make white people think more of themselves, which further attracts them to racist ideas. I thought I was a subpar student and was bombarded by messages from black people, white people, the media, that told me that the reason was rooted in my race, which made me more discouraged and less motivated as a student, which only further reinforced for me the racist idea that black people just weren't very studious, which made me feel even more despair or indifference, and on it went. At no point was the cycle interrupted by a deeper analysis of my own specific circumstances and shortcomings, or a critical look at the ideas of the society that judged me. Instead, the cycle hardened the racist ideas inside me until I was ready to preach them to others. I remember the MLK competition so fondly, but when I recall the racist speech I gave, I flush with shame. What would be Dr. King's message for the millennium? Let's visualize an angry 71-year-old Dr. King. And I began my remix of King's I Have a Dream speech. It was joyous, I started, our emancipation from enslavement, but now, 135 years later, the Negro is still not free. I was already thundering, my tone angry, more Malcolm than Martin. Our youth's minds are still in captivity. I did not say our youth's minds are in captivity of racist ideas, as I would say now. They think it's okay to be those who are most feared in our society, I said, as if it was their fault they were so feared. They think it's okay not to think, I charged, raising the classic racist idea that black youth don't value education as much as their non-black counterparts. No one seemed to care that this well-traveled idea had flown on anecdotes but had never been grounded in proof. Still, the crowd encouraged me with their applause. I kept shooting out unproven and disproven racist ideas about all things wrong with black youth, ironically on the day when all the things right about black youth were on display. I started pacing wildly back and forth on the runway for the pulpit, gaining momentum. They think it's okay to climb the high tree of pregnancy. Applause. They think it's okay to confine their dreams to sports and music. Applause. Had I forgotten that I, not black youth, was the one who had confined his dreams to sports? And I was calling black youth they? Who on earth did I think I was? Apparently my placement on that illustrious stage had lifted me out of the realm of ordinary, and thus inferior, black youngsters, and into the realm of the rare and extraordinary. In my applause-stoked flights of oratory, I didn't realize that to say something is wrong about a racial group is to say something is inferior about that racial group. I did not realize that to say something is inferior about a racial group is to say a racist idea. I thought I was serving my people, when in fact I was serving up racist ideas about my people to my people. The black judge seemed to be eating it up and clapping me on my back for more. I kept giving more. Their minds are being held captive, and our adults' minds are right there beside them, I said, motioning to the floor. Because they somehow think that the cultural revolution that began on the day of my dream's birth is over. How can it be over when many times we are unsuccessful because we lack intestinal fortitude? Applaud. How can it be over when our kids leave their houses not knowing how to make themselves, only knowing how to not make themselves? Applause. How can it be over if all of this is happening in our community? I asked, lowering my voice. So I say to you, my friends, that even though this cultural revolution may never be over, I still have a dream. Pause. One of the things that I like about this book is that this speech is kind of a foundational aspect of it. The book explores how and why all of those ideas that he's talking about are racist and breaks them down one by one. Sorry, I just like this book. Moving on. I still have a nightmare. The memory of this speech whenever I muster the courage to recall it anew. It is hard for me to believe I finished high school in the year 2000 touting so many racist ideas. A racist culture had handed me the ammunition to shoot black people, to shoot myself, and I took it and used it. Internalized racism is the real black-on-black crime. I was a dupe, a chump, who saw the ongoing struggles of black people on MLK Day 2000 and decided that black people themselves were the problem. This is the consistent function of racist ideas, and of any kind of bigotry more broadly, to manipulate us into seeing people as the problem instead of the policies that ensnare them. The language used by the 45th President of the United States offers a clear example of how this sort of racist language and thinking works. Long before he became president, Donald Trump liked to say, "Laziness is a trait in blacks." When he decided to run for president, his plan for making America great again, defaming Latinx immigrants as mostly criminals and rapists, and demanding billions for a border wall to block them, he promised a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States. Once he became president, he routinely called his black critics stupid. He claimed immigrants from Haiti all have AIDS, while praising white supremacists as very fine people, in the summer of 2017. Through it all, whenever someone pointed out the obvious, Trump responded with variations on a familiar refrain. No, I'm not racist. I'm the least racist person that you have ever interviewed, that you've ever met, that you've ever encountered. Trump's behavior may be exceptional, but his denials are normal. When racist ideas resound, denials that those ideas are racist typically follow. When racist policies resound, denials that those policies are racist also follow. Denial is the heartbeat of racism, beating across ideologies, races, and nations. It is beating within us. Many of us who strongly call out Trump's racist ideas will strongly deny our own. How often do we become reflexively defensive when someone calls something we've done or said racist? How many of us would agree with this statement? Racist isn't a descriptive word, it's a pejorative word. It is the equivalent of saying, I don't like you. These are actually the words of white supremacist Richard Spencer, who, like Trump, identifies as not racist. How many of us who despise the Trumps and white supremacists of the world share their definition of not racist? What's the problem with being not racist? It is a claim that signifies neutrality. I am not a racist, but neither am I aggressively against racism. But there is no neutrality in the racism struggle. The opposite of racist isn't not racist, it is anti-racist. What's the difference? One endorses either the idea of a racial hierarchy as a racist or racial equality, as a racist, or racial equality as an anti-racist. One either believes problems are rooted in groups of people, as a racist, or locates the roots of problems in power and policies as an anti-racist. One either allows racial inequities to persevere as a racist, or confronts racial inequities as an anti-racist. There is no in-between safe space of not racist. The claim of not racist neutrality is a mask for racism. This may seem harsh, but it's important at the outset that we apply one of the core principles of anti-racism, which is to return the word racist itself back to its proper usage. Racist is not, as Richard Spencer argues, a pejorative. It is not the worst word in the English language. It is not the equivalent of a slur. It is descriptive. And the only way to undo racism is to consistently identify and describe it, and then dismantle it. The attempt to turn this usefully descriptive term into an almost unusable slur is, of course, designed to do the opposite, to freeze us into inaction. The common idea of claiming colorblindness is akin to the notion of being not racist. As with the not racist, the colorblind individual, by ostensibly failing to see race, fails to see racism and falls into racist passivity. The language of colorblindness, like the language of not racist, is a mask to hide racism. Our Constitution is colorblind, U.S. Supreme Court Justice John Harlan proclaimed in his dissent to Plessy versus Ferguson, the case that legalized Jim Crow segregation in 1896.
Dance the horde.
Ooh. Hello, Sprinkles and Manic Pixel Dream Girl. Hello. Thank you for the raid.
Grab your sword and dance the horde.
I'm almost finished with this part, so I will keep reading and then I will say hi. Let's see.
I'll support you.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to go back just a bit. Our Constitution is colorblind, U.S. Supreme Court Justice John Harlan proclaimed in his dissent to Plessy versus Ferguson. Whoop! addict. Thank you for subscribing. Welcome to the fold. And thank you also for the 5 gift subs. Welcome to the fold. Shibakayo, Mudaline, Victorian Gamer, Riveran, and Rachellis. Welcome into the fold. Please feel free to join us in the Discord. That was very kind of you. Again, I will continue on. He proclaimed in Plessy versus Ferguson the case that legalized Jim Crow segregation in 1896. The white race deems itself to be the dominant race in this country, Justice Harlan went on. I doubt not it will continue to be for all time if it remains true to its great heritage. A colorblind constitution for a white supremacist America. The good news is that racist and anti-racist are not fixed identities. We can be a racist one minute and an anti-racist the next. What we say about race, what we do about race, in each moment determines what, and not who, we are. I used to be racist most of the time. I'm changing. I'm no longer identifying with racists by claiming to be not racist. I'm no longer speaking through the mask of racial neutrality. I'm no longer manipulated by racist ideas to see racial groups as problems. I no longer believe a black person cannot be racist. I'm no longer policing my every action around an imagined white or black judge, trying to convince white people of my equal humanity, and trying to convince black people I am representing the race well. I no longer care about how the actions of other black individuals reflect on me, since none of us are race representatives, nor is any individual responsible for someone else's racist ideas. And I've come to see that the movement from racist to anti-racist is always ongoing. It requires understanding and snubbing racism based on biology, ethnicity, body, culture, behavior, color, space, and class. And beyond that, it means standing ready to fight at racism's intersections with other bigotries. This book is ultimately about the basic struggle we're all in, the struggle to be fully human and to see that others are fully human. I share my own journey of being raised in the dueling racial consciousness of the Reagan-era black middle class, then right-turning onto the 10-lane highway of anti-black racism, a highway mysteriously free of police and free on gas, and veering off into the 2-lane highway of anti-white racism where gas is rare and police are everywhere, before finding and turning down the unlit dirt road of anti-racism. After taking this grueling journey to the dirt road of anti-racism, humanity can come upon the clearing of a potential future. An anti-racist world in all its imperfect beauty. It can become real if we focus on power instead of people, if we focus on changing policy instead of groups of people. It's possible if we overcome our cynicism about the permanence of racism. We know how to be racist. We know how to pretend to be not racist. Now let's know how to be anti-racist. And I'll stop there. That was just the introduction. Hello! Jimmy Jam, goodbye. Thank you so much for coming. In this book, does he go into the differences of racism versus discrimination? Yes, but he doesn't use those particular words. So he does go into it, but how do I say? How do I even explain this? This is very complicated. Okay, you understand. Okay, good. Sorry. But yes, it goes into it and explains it in many different ways. Actually, one of the chapters that we're going to be reading will hopefully be touching on something akin to that. So hopefully that will help. But cheers, STL. It's kind of different terms. It's not the same commonly known difference between racism and discrimination. And so this book and this man in this book, he really goes into like a lot of the fine nitty-gritty details of what racist ideas are and what kind of fuels them, and he labels individual racist ideas, and that's part of some of the chapters that we're going to be reading where you're going to be able to start to see him do that. And so he addresses discrimination, but not really by that word, because he's fitting those into a different framework that I consider more helpful more helpful to like figure things out. And also, yeah, shut up, Sprinkles. And I didn't get to do this earlier, but let me thank you for the raid with. Thank you both. Thank you. All right, no problem, Jerry Govier. Thank you for coming. Terraria. Oh, that sounds like a good time. You have a stupid question that you fear asking? Well, ask away. I will not get upset, and I will be upset if any of you get upset about the questions. That's the whole point of book club, is to be able to discuss these things so that we can learn together. Oh, that's really cute. Thank you. When asked honestly, yes. Yes. I'm so excited to get into some of the like nitty-gritty of the other stuff in this book. That was like a good primer. It's like a lot of broad strokes, and then he goes into deeper strokes later in the book. I'm excited. I'm excited for chapter 8, honestly. I think it's chapter 8. Oh, hang on. All right, STL. I will wait for your question if you feel comfortable asking it. But yeah, if you're following along in the book, we will, for chapter 1, we will be starting at it's the third paragraph, like after the paragraph breaks, it's the third one, and it starts my own still ongoing journey towards being an anti-racist. That's where we'll be starting. We'll be skipping the first 2 chunks, because I want to get to other things in the book. Are there Jim Crow laws in effect, or did they become more subtle? You'll hold off? Okay. Yes. Yeah. I'm not sure that like in our common consciousness we would like I don't know if you would like ask like, you know, if you just like ask a random person on the street, is this a Jim Crow law? They wouldn't say yes. But yes, like if you consider the fact that marijuana has not been decriminalized in a lot of, or it's been decriminalized in a lot of states, but there's still so many specifically black people in jail for marijuana crimes. If you think about the like difference in the length of time that black people get put in jail for very light sentences, if you think about the whole prison to pipeline, or basically lots of things with jail are essentially the new Jim Crow. Like, again, it's complicated. There is a whole book about this called The New Jim Crow. I highly recommend reading it. It will answer your questions about that. Mainly, it just became subtle. I don't know if it's necessarily subtle, actually. It's not subtle. It's just so unsubtle that it seems normal. You know what I mean? It's very normalized. It's very normalized. And there's purple in the background. Also gerrymandering, voter suppression, those are all real things. The fact that black babies and black mothers die from childbirth at extraordinarily high, really high levels. For many different reasons, but one of them being that when people with dark black skin are in pain, people don't believe that they're in pain, because like black people are believed to be able to tolerate a lot more pain than white people. And so if like a black mother is giving birth and she says, I'm hurting a lot, something is wrong, sometimes people just don't believe them, and it's really bad. There's like just such a high rate of, so there's lots of different ways. There's, I'm sorry to tell you that, Plasma. It's not exciting. Also the voter suppression targeting specifically communities of color and immigrants, because, you know, it's very feared that POC will vote for the Democrats. To be fair, historically speaking, it hasn't just been Republicans doing gerrymandering. Democrats have done it historically as well. It's just that right now, within my lifetime and some of the lifetime of my parents, it's mostly been Republicans. So I'm not trying to be like Republicans are inherently bad, but Republican policies right now are bad. No worries. Okay, so is this an American thing? Yes. Yes. What the stuff that I'll be discussing here and in this book are American, although certain things will apply to people all across the globe. It's just that this is going to be very focused on the dynamics of racism within our country. So, gerrymandering is definitely, I don't know if it's done elsewhere in the world, but gerrymandering is definitely very American. It sucks. Okay, so we're going to be continuing on with chapter 1 then. I'm just going to start. Each chapter begins with definitions, so I'm going to read them. Racist. One who is supporting a racist policy through their actions or inaction or expressing a racist idea. Antiracist. One who is supporting an anti-racist policy through their actions or expressing an anti-racist idea. And now I'm skipping down to the bottom of the chapter. Please read the rest of the chapter on your own time if you do own the book. It's very important context. I think it gives, especially if you are like religious and you're Christian, I think that it will be very interesting to learn that perspective on like Black Christianity. But moving along. My own still ongoing journey toward being an anti-racist began at Urbana 70, which is what the past 2 passages were about. What changed Ma and Dad led to a changing of their 2 unborn sons. This new definition of the Christian life became the creed that grounded my parents' lives and the lives of their children. I cannot disconnect my parents' religious strivings to be Christian from my secular strivings to be an anti-racist. And the key act for both of us was defining our terms so that we could begin to describe the world and our place in it. Definitions anchor us in principles. This is not a light point. If we don't do the basic work of defining the kind of people we want to be in language that is stable and consistent, we can't work toward stable, consistent goals. Some of my most consequential steps toward being an anti-racist have been the moments when I arrived at basic definitions. To be an anti-racist is to set lucid definitions of racism and anti-racism, racist and anti-racist policies, racist and anti-racist ideas, racist and anti-racist people. To be a racist is to constantly redefine racist in a way that exonerates one's changing policies, ideas, and personhood. So let's set some definitions. What is racism? Racism is a marriage of racist policies and racist ideas that produces and normalizes racial inequities. Okay, so what are racist policies and ideas? We have to define them separately to understand why they are married and why they interact so well together. In fact, let's take one step back and consider the definition of another important phrase, racial inequity. Racial inequity is when 2 or more racial groups are not standing on approximately equal footing. Here's an example of racial inequity. 71% of white families lived in owner-occupied homes in 2014, compared to 45% of Latinx families and 41% of Black families. Racial equity is when 2 or more racial groups are standing on a relatively equal footing. An example of racial equity would be if there were relatively equitable percentages of all 3 racial groups living in owner-occupied homes in the 40s, 70s, or better, 90s. A racist policy is any measure that produces or sustains racial inequity between racial groups. An anti-racist policy is any measure that produces or sustains racial equity between racial groups. By policy, I mean written and unwritten laws, rules, procedures, processes, regulations, and guidelines that govern people. There is no such thing as a non-racist or race-neutral policy. Every policy in every institution, in every community, in every nation is producing or sustaining either racial inequity or equity between racial groups. Racist policies have been described by other terms: institutional racism, structural racism, and systemic racism, for instance. But those are vaguer terms than racist policy. When I use them, I find myself having to immediately explain what they mean. Racist policy is more tangible and exacting, and more likely to be immediately understood by people, including its victims, who may not have the benefit of extensive fluency in racial terms. Racist policy says exactly what the problem is and where the problem is. Institutional racism and structural racism and systemic racism are redundant. Racism itself is institutional, structural, and systemic. Racist policy also cuts to the core of racism better than racial discrimination, another common phrase. Racial discrimination is an immediate and visible manifestation of an underlying racial policy. When someone discriminates against a person in a racial group, they are carrying out a policy or taking advantage of the lack of a protective policy. We all have the power to discriminate. Only an exclusive few have the power to make policy. Focusing on racial discrimination takes our eyes off the central agents of racism, racist policy and racist policymakers, or what I call racist power. Since the 1960s, racist power has commandeered the term racial discrimination, transforming the act of discriminating on the basis of race into an inherently racist act. But if racial discrimination is defined as treating, considering, or making a distinction in favor or against an individual based on that person's race, then racial discrimination is not inherently racist. The defining question is whether the discrimination is creating equity or inequity. If discrimination is creating equity, then it is anti-racist. If discrimination is creating inequity, then it is racist. Someone reproducing inequity through permanently assisting an overrepresented racial group into wealth and power is entirely different than someone challenging the inequity by temporarily assisting an underrepresented racial group into relative wealth and power until equity is reached. The only remedy to racist discrimination is anti-racist discrimination. The only remedy to past discrimination is present discrimination. The only remedy to present discrimination is future discrimination. As President Lyndon B. Johnson said in 1965, "You do not take a person who, for years, has been hobbled by chains and liberate him, bring him up to the starting line of a race, and then say, 'You're free to compete with all the others,' and still justly believe that you have been completely fair." As U.S. Supreme Court Justice Harry Blackmun wrote in 1978, "In order to get beyond racism, we must first take account of race. There is no other way. And in order to treat some persons equally, we must treat them differently." The racist champions of racist discrimination, engineered to maintain racial inequities before the 1960s, are now the racist opponents of anti-racist discrimination, engineered to dismantle those racial inequities. The most threatening racist movement is not the alt-right's unlikely drive for a white ethno-state, but the regular Americans' drive for a race-neutral one. The construct of race neutrality actually feeds white nationalist victimhood by positing the notion that any policy protecting or advancing non-white Americans towards equity is reverse discrimination. That is how racist power can call affirmative action policies that succeed in reducing racial inequities race-conscious, and standardized tests that produce racial inequities race-neutral. That is how they can blame the behavior of entire racial groups for the inequities between different racial groups and still say their ideas are not racist. But there is no such thing as a not racist idea, only racist ideas and anti-racist ideas. So what is a racist idea? A racist idea is any idea that suggests one racial group is inferior or superior to another racial group in any way. Racist ideas argue that the inferiorities and superiorities of racial groups explain racial inequities in society. As Thomas Jefferson suspected a decade after declaring white American independence, the blacks, whether originally a distinct race or made distinct by time and circumstances, are inferior to the whites in the endowments both of body and mind. An anti-racist idea is any idea that suggests the racial groups are equals in all their apparent differences, that there is nothing right or wrong with any racial group. Anti-racist ideas argue that racist policies are the cause of racial inequities. Understanding the differences between racist policies and anti-racist policies, between racist ideas and anti-racist ideas, allows us to return to our fundamental definitions. Racism is a powerful collection of racist policies that lead to racial inequity and are substantiated by racist ideas. Anti-racism is a powerful collection of anti-racist policies that lead to racial equity and are substantiated by anti-racist ideas. Once we have a solid definition of racism and anti-racism, we can start to make sense of the racialized world around us and before us. My maternal grandparents, Mary Ann and Alvin, moved their family to New York City in the 1950s on the final leg of the Great Migration, happy to get their children away from violent Georgia segregationists and the work of picking cotton under the increasingly hot Georgia sun. To think they were also moving their family away from the effects of climate change. Do-nothing climate policy is racist policy, since the predominantly non-white global south is being victimized by climate change more than the wider global north, even as the wider global north is contributing more to acceleration. Land is sinking, and temperatures are rising from Florida to Bangladesh. Droughts and food scarcity are ravishing bodies in eastern and southern Africa, a region already containing 25% of the world's malnourished population. Human-made environmental catastrophes disproportionately harming bodies of color are not unusual. For instance, nearly 4,000 U.S. areas, mostly poor and non-white, have higher lead poisoning rates than Flint, Michigan. I am one generation removed from picking cotton for pocket change under the warming climate in Guyton, outside Savannah. That's where we buried my grandmother in 1993. Memories of her comforting calmness, her dark green thumb, and her large trash bags of Christmas gifts lived on as we drove back to New York from her funeral. I'm going to issue a trigger warning right now for suicide. That's the next chapters. They don't go into detail, but just in case, I'm going to hold up my hand. When I'm done, you can unmute the stream. The next day, my father ventured up to Flushing, Queens to see his single mother, also named Mary Ann. She had the clearest dark brown skin, a smile that hugged you, and a wit that smacked you. When my father opened the door of her apartment, he smelled the fumes coming from the stove she'd left on, and some other fumes. His mother nowhere in sight, he rushed down the hallway and into her back bedroom. That's where he found his mother, as if sleeping, but dead. Her struggle with Alzheimer's, a disease more prevalent among African Americans, was over. There may be no more consequential white privilege than life itself. White lives matter to the tune of 3.5 additional years over black lives in the United States, which is just the most glaring of a host of health disparities, starting from infancy, where black infants die at twice the rate of white infants. But at least my grandmothers and I met. We shared. We loved. I never met my paternal grandfather. I never met my maternal grandfather, Alvin, killed by cancer 3 years before my birth. In the United States, African Americans are 25% more likely to die of cancer than whites. My father survived prostate cancer, which kills twice as many black men as it does white men. Breast cancer disproportionately kills black women. 3 million African Americans and 4 million Latinx secured health insurance through the Affordable Care Act, dropping uninsured rates for both groups to around 11% before President Barack Obama left office. But a staggering 28.5 million Americans remained uninsured, a number primed for growth after Congress repealed the individual mandate in 2017. And it is becoming harder for people of color to vote out of office the politicians crafting these policies designed to shorten their lives. Racist voting policy has evolved from disenfranchising by Jim Crow voting laws to disenfranchising by mass incarceration and voter ID laws. Sometimes these efforts are so blatant that they are struck down. North Carolina enacted one of these targeted voter ID laws, but in July 2016, the Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit struck it down, ruling that its various provisions target African Americans with almost surgical precision. But others have remained and been successful. Wisconsin's strict voter ID law suppressed approximately 200,000 votes, again primarily targeting voters of color, in the 2016 election. Donald Trump won that critical swing state by 22,748 votes. We are surrounded by racial inequity, as visible as the law, as hidden as our private thoughts. The question for each of us is, what side of history will we stand on? A racist is someone who is supporting a racist policy by their actions or inaction, or expressing a racist idea. An anti-racist is someone who is supporting an anti-racist policy by their actions or expressing an anti-racist idea. Racist and anti-racist are like peelable name tags that are placed and replaced based on what someone is doing or not doing, supporting or expressing in each moment. These are not permanent tattoos. No one becomes a racist or anti-racist. We can only strive to be one or the other. We can unknowingly strive to be a racist. We can knowingly strive to be an anti-racist. Like fighting an addiction, being an anti-racist requires persistent self-awareness, constant self-criticism, and regular self-examination. Racist ideas have defined our society since its beginning and can feel so natural and obvious as to be banal, but anti-racist ideas remain difficult to comprehend, in part because they go against the flow of this country's history. As Audre Lorde said in 1980, we have all been programmed to respond to the human differences between us with fear and loathing, and to handle that difference in one of three ways. Ignore it, and if that is not possible, copy it if we think it is dominant, or destroy it if we think it is subordinate. But we have no patterns for relating across our human differences as equals. To be an anti-racist is a radical choice in the face of this history, requiring a radical reorientation of our consciousness. Okay, that's the end of chapter 1. We will continue on with chapter 2, and we'll just be starting into chapter 2 where chapter 2 starts. So that actually touched on some of your guys' questions a little bit, actually, interestingly. Are there more questions happening here? Also, cheers, STL. Thank you for the drink. And yes, agreed, Zach. You don't know how to get someone who thinks that to change their mind, even when presented with these arguments. Yeah. So part of the thing, how would I say this? Understanding, like, coming to terms with racism in America is a journey. And like, I'm not saying that as like, oh my God, life is a journey, but like, it's a journey because it's hard to come into contact with such a like condemning idea of your own nation when like that's not clear. That's not what like 99% of us want America to be. And there's a bunch of like emotional and mental hurdles that the brain tries to go through to protect itself from the horror of this idea, because it is really horrifying. This book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, is not going to be for like beginning people who are still like, but affirmative action is reverse racist. Those people are at a different point in their racism journey. I don't know. I think the argument that I use when it comes to affirmative action, to explain affirmative action to people and like to explain reparations, is that like, there is STL. Is that, you know, historically speaking, all of America's economy was founded on the work of black slaves. Just historically speaking, if you look at it, if you talk to economists, if you read history books, America would not be what we are. We would be nowhere near. We would not be as large of an economy. There's just like we would not have an economy. We would not be a great nation if we hadn't exploited the labor of so many people in slavery. And those people who were trapped in slavery weren't paid wages, ever. They just weren't paid wages. And then once slavery was over, they weren't like given the wages that they were deserved. They were just like thrown and being like, here, now you're free, go off to the wind, good luck earning money. And so reparations is what I try to explain to people is you're paying back the people whose ancestors basically lost lifetimes worth of money. And that's where reparations and affirmative actions comes in. Not sure we are that great, to be honest. We're great, the system isn't. So here's the thing that I've been thinking a lot about this. And ooh, yes, Riverent. That's a really good point. But here's something that I've been thinking a lot about this, and I want to say it. We're talking about racism, and whenever the subject of racism comes up, people get so ashamed of themselves, of like their ancestry, if they're white, of our nation, and like the institutions that it's built upon. And as much as I fully understand that, I don't want anybody to walk away from discussions of racism feeling like their whiteness is something that they need to be ashamed of because of parts of the history of that whiteness. That's not something that I agree with. Like, I am for those of you who know, I am half German, so I am half white as well, but I'm half German. And in Germany, I'm extremely proud of being German. I'm extremely proud of being German American. And in Germany, we look back on Hitler and that period of time in history, and we learn a lot about it so as to not repeat it. And I am very proud of being German, but that doesn't mean that I'm gonna own Hitler. That doesn't mean that I'm gonna be like, yeah, Hitler was German and I love him. That's not a thing. That's not a thing that I'm doing. I'm proud of being German, and I'm proud of my culture, but I choose to disown certain parts of my culture that don't agree with what I think that we are and we can be. And I don't want anybody to walk away from this feeling like I have to be ashamed of my whiteness because my whiteness has done so many bad things. Your white culture has also done white culture. These are very broad strokes, but you understand what I'm trying to say. You have so many things to be proud of in your history and with your ancestors, and you should still be able to feel proud of them, even knowing that your ancestors were engaged in things that you would not agree with and would not want. You don't have to disown all of your culture just because part of it was bad. Just disown the bad part. Just be like, I'm not proud of anybody in my family who supported Hitler. I'm not about that. It was a different time, but they got us to where we are today, and I do love them for that. Let's continue on with not letting neo-Nazis take over the world. You know what I mean? Fuck the Confederate flag. Well, yes, that part, yes. I do agree with that. Racism is structural and systemic, less tangible, and discrimination is more physical incidents. Affirmative action could be a discriminating policy, but anti-racist because it attempts to bridge the gap between the racist policies of the past. Yes. Yeah. Yes. What part of the argument he was trying to make in chapter 1 is that treating groups of people differently based off of what group that they're in isn't inherently bad. It's the effects of what you're doing, of the treatment that you're enacting upon these people that matter. Because, like, you know, we can look at for example, our jail system and acknowledge that there's a lot of black people who are locked up in there for, like, really long lengths of time, for, like, 30 years, just for, like, possessing marijuana. And there's a lot of white people out there who have possessed marijuana for a long time, but when the police find out about it, they don't go to jail. I have stepbrothers who are white, and something like this happened to one of them, and it was amazing. They, like, went to jail for, like, a day, and then were fine. And I was like, wow, if you were black, you might have been killed. That's not the thing. That's not the same. And so if we had a policy that would go out to counteract that, if we had a policy that was like, we are going to let all of these black people out of jail who were basically imprisoned on racist policies, then that would be discriminating on the basis of race, but it would be reaching equity because now we're undoing a lot of the injustice that has been done to one segment of the population, while another segment of the population never had that injustice done to them because marijuana possession didn't seem as bad when white people did it. You know what I mean? STL. The global warming thing is interesting. I think that we're coming to, like, a different understanding of what racism is, because we're trying to basically revamp that idea with this book, because we still have, I think it's still really easy in our heads to be like, racist is somebody who inherently believes other people are inferior, right? And like, that's true, but racism isn't always done by people who believe that other people are inferior. Racism isn't always done by people who even necessarily think about the effects of their actions or who their actions might be affecting, you know? I think that's what's happening with the climate change issue, is that it's not like people are going out there being like, yeah, I'm looking to keep third world countries down. I hate those brown people or anything. It's just that it is disproportionately affecting nations filled with brown people. And so, by definition, because it's causing inequities among different races, and, like, we're kind of the ones who are causing it, and we're profiting off of causing it, and other people are gonna, like, lose all of their livelihoods, yeah, that's where the idea is coming from. You don't think most of the people in the South believe it's real? Yeah, that's fair. That's a whole other issue. That's a whole other issue. Yeah, see, that is also true, and also very interesting discussion. That is the one of the fun things about understanding racism and how its effects in America is that you kind of get to start unraveling things. You kind of get to start feeling more and more like an American revolutionary, where you're like, oh, hey, this is weird, and this isn't the way that America as a whole collectively wants this system to work. And I wasn't like super clear on where it wasn't working, but now I can see where it's not working. And so you're given that ability to like recognize it and be like, hey, that's not what we're trying to be here. That's not a thing we're trying to do. Ooh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Yes, very much STL. This next chapter I'm actually really excited to talk about. This is chapter 2. It's about dueling consciousness. I'm just going to preface this chapter by saying this chapter hits really close to home for me because of my upbringing and because of being mixed race, and I have a lot of like personal knowledge, personal experience, and anecdotes that I can bring to this chapter. It's also in my opinion, I don't know, I'm not white, so I don't know, but I'm assuming that this might be a little bit harder to grasp just because I have a lot of ideas, just because like, I don't know. I would assume that if you didn't have the direct lived experience, it would be harder to grasp. I don't know, though. You guys are going to have to tell me how easy this is to understand. But I'm just saying that I feel like there will be a lot of places here where if you are confused, I will definitely be able to explain things. So if you have any questions, please hold on to them. Also, cheers to the both of you. All right. Chapter 2, Dueling Consciousness. And back to the definitions. Assimilationist, one who is expressing the racist idea that a racial group is culturally or behaviorally inferior and is supporting cultural or behavioral enrichment programs to develop that racial group. Segregationist, one who is expressing the racist idea that a permanently inferior racial group can never be developed and is supporting policy that segregates away that racial group. Antiracist, one who is expressing the idea that racial groups are equals and none needs developing, and is supporting policy that reduces racial inequity. My parents had not seen each other since the bus ride to Urbana 70. Christmas approached in 1973. Soul Liberation held a concert at the iconic Broadway Presbyterian Church in Harlem that turned into a reunion of sorts for the New York attendees of Urbana 70. Dad and Ma showed up. Old friends beckoned and something new. After the chords of Soul Liberation fell silent, my parents finally spoke again and a spark finally lit. Days later, Dad called. He asked Ma out. "I've been called to the mission field," Ma responded, leaving in March. Ma and Dad persevered, even after Ma left to teach in a rural Liberian village outside Monrovia for 9 months. 8 years later, they were married, daring to name me, their second son, exalted father, when I arrived in a world not in the practice of exalting black bodies. Just before that arrival, as my pregnant mother celebrated her 31st birthday on June 24th, 1982, President Reagan declared war on her unborn baby. "We must put drug abuse on the run through stronger law enforcement," Reagan said in the Rose Garden. It wasn't drug abuse that was put on the run, of course, but people like me born into this regime of stronger law enforcement. The stiffer sentencing policies for drug crimes, not a net increase in crime, caused the American prison population to quadruple between 1980 and 2000. While violent criminals typically account for about half the prison population at any given time, more people were incarcerated for drug crimes than violent crimes every year from 1993 to 2009. White people are more likely than Black and Latinx people to sell drugs, and the races consume drugs at similar rates, yet African Americans are far more likely than whites to be jailed for drug offenses. Nonviolent Black drug offenders remain in prisons for about the same length of time, 58.7 months, as violent white criminals, 61.7 months. In 2016, Black and Latinx people were still grossly overrepresented in the prison population at 56%, double their percentage of the U.S. adult population. White people were still grossly underrepresented in the prison population at 30%, about half their percentage of the U.S. adult population. Reagan didn't start this so-called war, as historian Elizabeth Hinton recounts. President Lyndon B. Johnson first put us on the run when he named 1965 the year when this country began a thorough, intelligent, and effective war on crime. My parents were in high school when Johnson's war on crime mocked his under-supported war on poverty, like a heavily armed shooter mocking the under-resourced trauma surgeon. President Richard Nixon announced his war on drugs in 1971 to devastate his harshest critics, Black and anti-war activists. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news. Nixon's domestic policy chief, John Ehrlichman, told a Harper's reporter years later. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did. Tetsuki, thank you for following. Enjoy your apprenticeship here. I'm going to stop here just to point out that quote is true. I don't know that this is common knowledge, but there's been like a whole bunch of journalistic reporting about how much the the administration knew what they were doing and just admitted to doing it, and somehow nobody cared or noticed. Oh, thank you so much for following, and thank you, yeah. So, sorry, I just wanted to add that you can, if you wish to, you can research that and find just more evidence about them admitting that they knew it. Going on. Black people joined in the vilification, convinced that homicidal drug dealers, gun toters, and thieving heroin addicts were flushing down the drain all the hard-won gains of the civil rights movement, to quote an editorial in the Washington Afro-American in 1981. Oh, thank you for following. Enjoy your apprenticeship here. Some, if not most, Black leaders, in an effort to appear as saviors of the people against this menace, turned around and set the Black criminal alongside the white racist as the enemies of the people. Seemingly contradictory calls to lock up and to save Black people dueled in legislatures around the country, but also in the minds of Americans. Black leaders joined with Republicans from Nixon to Reagan and with Democrats from Johnson to Bill Clinton in calling for and largely receiving more police officers, tougher and mandatory sentencing, and more jails. But they also called for the end of police brutality, more jobs, better schools, and drug treatment programs. These calls were less enthusiastically received. Yeah, aggro. By the time I came along in 1982, the shame about black-on-black crime was on the verge of overwhelming a generation's pride about Black is beautiful. Many non-Black Americans looked down on Black addicts in revulsion, but too many Black folk looked down on the same addicts in shame. Both of my parents emerged from poor families, one from northern urban projects, one from southern rural fields. Both framed their rise from poverty into the middle class in the 1980s as a climb up the ladder of education and hard work. As they climbed, they were inundated with racist talking points about Black people refusing to climb, the ones who were irresponsibly strung out on heroin or crack, who enjoyed stealing and being criminally dependent on the hard-earned money of climbing Americans like them. Cece. That is the assimilationist perspective. Yes, the assimilationist perspective is that the Black criminal and the white racist are both equally the problem, which is a distinction made between an assimilationist perspective, which is racist, and an anti-racist perspective, just to clarify. In 1985, adored civil rights lawyer Eleanor Holmes Norton took to the New York Times to claim the remedy is not as simple as providing necessities and opportunities, as anti-racists argued. She urged the overthrow of the complicated predatory ghetto subculture. She called on people like my parents with ghetto origins to save ghetto males and women by impressing on them the values of hard work, education, respect for family, and achieving a better life for one's children. Norton provided no empirical evidence to substantiate her position that certain ghetto blacks were deficient in any of these values. But my parents, along with many others in the new black middle class, consumed these ideas. The class that challenged racist policies from the 1950s through the 1970s now began challenging other black people in the 1980s and 1990s. Anti-racism seemed like an indulgence in the face of the self-destructive behavior they were witnessing all around them. My parents followed Norton's directive. They fed me the mantra that education and hard work would uplift me just as it had uplifted them, and would, in the end, uplift all black people. My parents, even from within their racial consciousness, were susceptible to the racist idea that it was laziness that kept black people down, so they paid more attention to chastising black people than to Reagan's policies, which were chopping the ladder they climbed up and then punishing people for falling. The Reagan Revolution was just that, a radical revolution for the benefit of the already powerful. It further enriched high-income Americans by cutting their taxes and government regulations, installing a Christmas tree military budget, and arresting the power of unions. 70% of middle-income blacks said they saw a great deal of racial discrimination in 1979, before Reagan revolutionaries rolled back enforcement of civil rights laws and affirmative action regulations, before they rolled back funding to state and local governments whose contracts and jobs had become safe avenues into the single-family urban home of the black middle class. In the same month that Reagan announced his war on drugs, on Ma's birthday in 1982, he cut the safety net of federal welfare programs and Medicaid, sending more low-income blacks into poverty. His stronger law enforcement sent more black people into the clutches of violent cops who killed 22 black people for every white person in the early 1980s. Black youth were 4 times more likely to be unemployed in 1985 than in 1954. But few connected the increase in unemployment to the increase in violent crime. Americans have long been trained to see the deficiencies of people rather than policy. It's a pretty easy mistake to make. People are in our faces. Policies are distance. We are particularly poor at seeing the policies lurking behind the struggles of people. And so my parents turned away from the problems of policy to look at the problems of people, and reverted to striving to save and civilize black people rather than liberate them. Civilizer theology became more attractive to my parents in the face of the rise of crack and the damage it did to black people, as it did to so many children of civil rights and black power. But in many ways, liberation theology remained their philosophical home, the home they raised me in. Agreed, Tetsuki. Also, again, just in case if you didn't know about this, there is also unfortunate evidence that crack was introduced into low-income and colored communities on purpose by the government. So I'm not going to get into that here because that's a whole rabbit hole. But you can. Yep, you can. You can read and learn about that if you want to. It's very unfortunate, but it's crazy how. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, JL Rumble, thank you for the host. Okay, continuing on. Deep down, my parents were still the people who were set on fire by liberation theology back in Urbana. Ma still dreamed of globetrotting the black world as a liberating missionary, a dream her Liberian friends encouraged in 1974. Dad dreamed of writing liberating poetry, a dream Professor Addison Gale encouraged in 1971. And thank you for following. Enjoy your apprenticeship. I always wonder what would have been if my parents had not let their reasonable fears stop them from pursuing their dreams. Traveling Ma helping to free the black world. Dad accompanying her and finding inspiration for his freedom poetry. Instead, Ma settled for a corporate career in healthcare technology. Dad settled for an accounting career. They entered the American middle class, a space then as now defined by its disproportionate white majority, and began to look at themselves and their people not only through their own eyes, but also through the eyes of others. They joined other black people trying to fit into that white space, while still trying to be themselves and save their people. They were not wearing a mask as much as splitting into two minds. This conceptual duple reflected what W.E.B. Du Bois indelibly voiced in The Souls of Black Folk in 1903. It is a peculiar sensation, this double consciousness, this sense of always looking at oneself through the eyes of others. Du Bois wrote, he would neither Africanize America nor bleach his Negro soul in a flood of white Americanism. Du Bois wished to be both a Negro and an American. Du Bois wished to inhabit opposing constructs. To be American is to be white. To be white is to not be a Negro. Sorry, as I said, this chapter touches on things that for me. What Du Bois termed double consciousness may be more precisely termed dueling consciousness. One ever feels his two-ness, Du Bois explained. An American, a Negro. Two souls, two thoughts, two unreconciled strivings, two warring ideals in one dark body whose dogged strength alone keeps it from being torn asunder. Du Bois also explained how this war was being waged within his own dark body, wanting to be a Negro and wanting to escape into the mass of Americans in the same way that the Irish and Scandinavians were doing. I'm going to share some of my personal experiences after this because I keep almost starting to cry, so I feel like I probably should. These dueling ideas were there in 1903, and the same duel overtook my parents, and it remains today. The duel within Black consciousness seems to usually be between anti-racist and assimilationist ideas. Du Bois believed in both the anti-racist concept of racial relativity, of every racial group looking at itself with its own eyes, and the assimilationist concept of racial standards, of looking at oneself through the eyes of another racial group, in his case, white people. In other words, he wanted to liberate Black people from racism, but he also wanted to change them, to save them from their relic of barbarism. Du Bois argued in 1903 that racism and the low social level of the mass of the race were both responsible for the Negro's degradation. Assimilation would be part of the solution to this problem. Assimilationist ideas are racist ideas. Assimilationists can position any racial group as the superior standard that another racial group should be measuring themselves against, the benchmark they should be trying to reach. Assimilationists typically position white people as the superior standard. Do Americans ever stop to reflect that there are in this land 1,000,000 men of Negro blood who, judged by any standard, have reached the full measure of the best type of modern European culture? Is it fair, is it decent, is it Christian to belittle such aspiration? Du Bois asked in 1903. The dual consciousness played out in a different way for my parents, who became all about Black self-reliance. In 1985, they were drawn to Floyd H. Flake's Allen African Methodist Episcopal Church in Southside Queens. Flake and his equally magnetic wife Elaine grew Allen into a megachurch and one of the area's largest private sector employers through its liberated kingdom of commercial and social service enterprises. From its school to its senior citizen housing complex to its crisis centers for victims of domestic abuse, there were no walls to Flake's church. It was exactly the type of ministry that would naturally fascinate those descendants of Urbana 70. My father joined Flake's ministerial staff in 1989. My favorite church program happened every Thanksgiving. We would arrive as lines of people were hugging the church building, which smelled particularly good that day. Perfumes of gravy and cranberry sauce warmed the November air. The aromas multiplied in deliciousness as we entered the basement fellowship hall, where the ovens were. I usually found my spot in the endless assembly line of servers. I could barely see over the food, but I strained up on my toes to help feed every bit of 5,000 people. I tried to be as kind to these hungry people as my mother's peach cobbler. This program of Black people feeding Black people embodied the gospel of Black self-reliance that the adults in my life were feeding me. Black self-reliance was a double-edged sword. One side was an abhorrence of white supremacy and white paternalism, white rulers and white saviors. On the other, a love of Black rulers and Black saviors, of Black paternalism. On one side was the anti-racist belief that Black people were entirely capable of ruling themselves, of relying on themselves. On the other, the assimilationist idea that black people should focus on pulling themselves up by their baggy jeans and tight halter tops, getting off crack, street corners, and government handouts, as if those were the things partially holding their incomes down. This dueling consciousness nourished black pride by insisting that there was nothing wrong with black people, but it also cultivated shame with its implication that there was something behaviorally wrong with black people. Well, at least those other black people. If the problem was in our own behavior, then Reagan revolutionaries were not keeping black people down. We were keeping ourselves down. White people have their own dueling consciousness, between the segregationist and the assimilationist, the slave trader and the missionary, the pro-slavery exploiter and the anti-slavery civilizer, the eugenicist and the melting potter, the mass incarcerator and the mass developer, the Blue Lives Matter and the All Lives Matter, the not racist nationalist and the not racist American. Assimilationist ideas and segregationist ideas are the two types of racist ideas, the duel within racist thought. White assimilationist ideas challenge segregationist ideas that claim people of color are incapable of development, incapable of reaching the superior standard, incapable of becoming white, and therefore fully human. Assimilationists believe that people of color can, in fact, be developed, become fully human, just like white people. Assimilationist ideas reduce people of color to the level of children needing instruction on how to act. Segregationist ideas cast people of color as animals, to use Trump's descriptor for Latinx immigrants. Unteachable after a point. The history of the racialized world is a three-way fight between assimilationists, segregationists, and anti-racists. Anti-racist ideas are based in the truth that racial groups are equals in all the ways they are different. Assimilationist ideas are rooted in the notion that certain racial groups are culturally or behaviorally inferior, and segregationist ideas spring from a belief in genetic racial distinction and fixed hierarchy. I am apt to suspect the Negroes, and in general all the other species of men, for there are 4 or 5 different kinds, to be naturally inferior to the whites, Enlightenment philosopher David Hume wrote in 1753. There never was a civilized nation of any other complexion than white. Such a uniform and constant difference could not happen in so many countries and ages if nature had not made an original distinction between these breeds of men. David Hume declared that all races are created unequal, but Thomas Jefferson seemed to disagree in 1776 when he declared all men are created equal. But Thomas Jefferson never made the anti-racist declaration, all racial groups are equals. While segregationist ideas suggest a racial group is permanently inferior, assimilationist ideas suggest a racial group is temporarily inferior. It would be hazardous to affirm that, equally cultivated for a few generations, the Negro would not become equal, Jefferson once wrote, in assimilationist fashion. The dueling white consciousness fashioned 2 types of racist policies, reflecting the duel of racist ideas. Since assimilationists posit cultural and behavioral hierarchy, assimilationist policies and programs are geared toward developing, civilizing, and integrating a racial group, to distinguish from programs that uplift individuals. By which this book means programs that uplift individuals would be anti-racist, and these other ones are not. Since segregationists posit the incapability of a racial group to be civilized and developed, segregationist policies are geared toward segregating, enslaving, incarcerating, deporting, and killing. Since anti-racists posit that the racial groups are already civilized, anti-racist policies are geared toward reducing racial inequities and creating equal opportunity. White people have generally advocated for both assimilationist and segregationist policies. People of color have generally advocated for both anti-racist and assimilationist policies. The history of the American Negro is the history of this strife, to quote Du Bois. The strife between the assimilationist and the anti-racist, between mass civilizing and mass equalizing. In Du Bois's black body, in my parents' black bodies, in my young black body, this double desire, this dueling consciousness, yielded an inner strife between black pride and a yearning to be white. My own assimilationist ideas stopped me from noticing the racist policies really getting high during Reagan's drug war. The dueling white consciousness has, from its position of relative power, shaped the struggle within black consciousness. Despite the cold truth that America was founded by white men for white men, as segregationist Jefferson Davis said on the floor of the U.S. Senate in 1860, black people have often expressed a desire to be American, and have been encouraged in this by America's undeniable history of anti-racist progress away from chattel slavery and Jim Crow. Despite the cold instructions from the likes of Nobel laureate Gunnar Myrdal to become assimilated into American culture, black people have also, as Du Bois stated, desired to remain Negro, discouraged by America's undeniable history of racist progress, from advancing police violence and voter suppression to widening racial inequities in areas ranging from health to wealth. History duels, the undeniable history of anti-racist progress, the undeniable history of racist progress. Before and after the Civil War, before and after civil rights, before and after the first black presidency, the white consciousness duels. The white body defines the American body. The white body instructs the black body to assimilate into the American body. The white body rejects the black body assimilating into the American body, and history and consciousness duel anew. The black body in turn experiences the same duel. The black body is instructed to become an American body. The American body is the white body. The black body strives to assimilate into the American body. The American body rejects the black body. The black body separates from the American body. The black body is instructed to assimilate into the American body, and history and consciousness duel anew. But there is a way to get free. To be anti-racist is to emancipate oneself from the dueling consciousness. To be anti-racist is to conquer the assimilationist consciousness and the segregationist consciousness. The white body no longer presents itself as the American body. The black body no longer strives to be the American body, knowing there is no such thing as the American body, only American bodies, racialized by power. That is the end of chapter 2. Yes, actually, I'm not going to be reading from passages about that, but there is, I think actually it's literally this next, I think it's chapter 3 in this book that does discuss the racial stereotyping of all of the races, of the 5 races. Oh, it's so gross. The 5 races from the Enlightenment. Blah, gross. Remember the crowbar that I mentioned? Yeah, that's part of the reason that I wanted to pick these specific chapters, because the specific chapters that I chose, from what I've been witnessing online and from what I've heard from, talking to white people, which I've done all my life, the chapters that I picked are kind of addressing a lot of the confusion that I see a lot of people having. So that's why I picked them. Oh, DJ Melia, yay! That makes me so happy. You get why this chapter affected me? Yes. Actually, here, okay. Yeah, this chapter hits really close to home for me. I wouldn't say that I was raised in an explicitly assimilationist atmosphere. Sorry, I'm gonna get emotional, but it's okay. It's fine emotions. It's just not emotions I'm unfamiliar with. But whatever. My family history is pretty complicated. My mom is a German immigrant from Germany, so she's the first generation immigrant. And I'm a second generation immigrant. Not immigrant. Yeah, no, technically. Well, I was born on U.S. soil. It's complicated. Military. Anyways, and my dad is African American. And my dad also has a complicated history because he was adopted by a white family. And so he was raised first of all, in a horribly racist world. My dad actually doesn't really tend to talk with us about a lot of the things that he's experienced. I know some of the things, the racism that he's experienced, because he's told me secondhand. I've heard secondhand from my stepmom. But I'm sorry, I'm going to get emotional because this is relating to my family. But my dad did his best to try and raise us in a way that we wouldn't feel as much of the effects of racism as much as he could, as much as he possibly could. And so like he put in a lot of particular effort to give us access to education and to like take us on trips and to pick white neighborhoods to live in that had good schools so we could go to good schools. And I don't want to say intentionally because I don't know if it was intentionally, but like I didn't get to learn a lot about the black half of my identity growing up because my dad was so intent. I found out later when I was an adult, my dad was so intent on keeping us away from the things and like the behaviors and like the languages and the culture that society would deem inferior. So my dad was trying to set us up for as much success as he could by keeping us away from these things. And by keeping us away from, like, black culture, essentially. Which, like, I don't really want to go too far into that because that's, like, complicated personal feelings about my relationship with my father. And I love my dad so much, and I don't think that he made any bad decisions raising us. I want to be clear. But, like, I see why he did that, and honestly, the stuff that he did set us up for a lot more success than other families would have been able to have. And I'm extremely privileged in that way to have had a dad who like understood the system of racism that we grew up in and did his best to provide his children with an assimilationist avenue out, but still an avenue out. He wanted us to never have to feel the things that he felt growing up. But of course, you know, I don't think that I have said that he tried to raise us as exotic. I think that you might be merging two different things. My dad would never have tried to raise us as exotic, but he didn't. It wasn't something we talked about. We didn't really talk about race in my family. So it was all things that I learned about kind of in hushed tones and through people interacting weirdly with me. You know, my experience with racism was really weird, first of all, because I benefit from a lot of colored privilege. I am very light-skinned, and so white people aren't as afraid of me as they are of darker skinned colored people. They don't view me as inferior as they do other people like that. But at the same time, there are these moments that I can look back to in my life of like me trying to go up to play with a bunch of white kids and then reacting in like abject fear. And I would like come home and be like, Dad, I don't know, I don't want to go outside to play anymore. And he wouldn't explain to me why. My little sister, we lived across the street from people who she was in a class with, and she went over to play with them all the time, but she always left before their father came home. And she didn't think anything of it until their father came home a little bit too early, and their father said, "You will never play here again. You are not supposed to interact." Like to his kids, he was like, "You are not supposed to interact with her. Don't talk to her anymore. She's not allowed at our house." There are these like little bits and things growing up, and I knew and understood that to be black was to be bad. As a child, that was my thought. I was like, black is bad. I don't want to be black. I'm not black. And I brainwashed myself, or rather, I helped society brainwashed me into me thinking like, well, if I can just pretend that I'm white, then racism won't affect me. And racism, I'll be fine. I will get to choose to not be affected by racism. That sounds amazing to like an 8-year-old. And so like deep down, even into my like daydreams, I was always like, I'm a writer. I have a big imagination. As a kid, I would imagine myself as a little white girl in all of the storylines that I composed with myself having any kind of role. I would imagine myself as white. And I imagined myself as white because I couldn't picture a brown girl in the leading roles that I wanted to be in the stories I was making for myself. You know what I mean? Thank you for the raid. Sorry, I'm in the middle of an emotional talk about my childhood and racism. But like, I literally constructed the stories for myself with myself as a white person in mind because I didn't think it would be possible for me as a brown person to be in the leading role. And like that's what like I was this is from the time I was like 3 to like 12. Like how intense does the racism in our society have to be that you can be a person of color and just pretend to yourself that actually you're white because you so disdain being identified with other people of color? That's where I was at. Like, this is why I say, like, I don't judge people wherever they come from with their understanding of racism, because I also was racist. I was very racist growing up. You know what I mean? Like, I didn't want to be one of them. I didn't want to be one of them, one of those black people. Those black people are bad. I don't want to be one of them. And it took a really long time for me to, like, well, it took a long time. It took a lot of, like, overt racism coming at me before I realized that how real racism was. And to be honest, I'm ashamed to admit how long it took me, but it wasn't until I was 20 years old and I went on a study abroad trip to Vietnam, and I experienced they did not mean any harm, but boy, was that bad. Whoa, that was real racist over there. Because, you know, they just have the media that's exported. They don't have that many black people. They get really excited when they see black people, but like, also we were like a traveling show of brown people walking around. And I was darker then than I am now because I stay inside mostly. But it wasn't until I took this trip to Vietnam that I realized that I like came back and I basically had a mental breakdown, because I was like, I realized that I had been trying to escape racism for myself my entire life. And I realized then in that moment that there was no place on the entire globe that I could go to where I would not experience some form of racism. And like, you know, the mixed kid struggle is that, like, I can't go to white people won't claim me as one of their own. I can't go to black people don't necessarily inherently claim me as one of their own. You know, the mixed race feel is that, like, there isn't, like, necessarily one place to belong in, aside from maybe with other mixed people, kind of. So yeah, reading this describes, and I've read this before, this is not, like, the first time I've come into contact with these ideas about double consciousness and ooh! Ah, yeah, lift up that mood. Yeah, but this isn't like the first time that I've come into contact with the ideas of double consciousness or anything. It's just that, like, it's so real. It's so real to me, that those two perspectives and like the struggle and that, like, the yearning to be white that I experienced when I was a kid. I don't yearn to be white anymore. That's not a thing that I do anymore. But when I was a kid, I was so convinced that black people were bad. I was just so convinced. I was like, God, why would I ever want to be one of them? And that's first of all disgusting, and that's like awful that that's what we're teaching our children who are brown. We're teaching our brown children to hate themselves in this way. And this book goes into this man's own experience with that kind of thing. A good Charrot laugh emote. Thank you, STL. No worries. I'm sorry, Aggro. Yeah, that too, DGA. Reading it out loud brought out the emotion. Oh. Well, I'm glad that I can help, Tetsuki. And actually, interestingly, I did fully come to being a anti-racist instead of an assimilationist. I had to, cause like, just real quick, this isn't just a thing that, like, brown people experience. This is a thing that, like, all immigrants from other countries experience. My mom has said, and it's kind of given her an interesting, hey! STL has gifted a sub to Tetsuki. Tetsuki, welcome to the fold. Feel free to come join us in the Discord if you want. The Discord is where the community is. It's a good space. You should probably... Oh yeah, and STL, I'm so sorry. Thank you for your $6.90. STL said, thanks for sharing, boss. Hopefully this will make you feel a bit better. It did. Thank you. But yeah, just real quick, just to clarify, I want to make sure, like, my mom coming to America as a German immigrant experienced this too. And it interestingly gave her her own kind of assimilationist racist perspective, because she came to America and she worked really hard, first of all, to learn how to speak English, but second of all, to learn how to be more American. So that, because she said when she first got here, people treated her horribly because she was so clearly foreign. And so she worked really hard to try and get rid of her accent, to try and learn like the mannerisms, to try and be more American so that people would stop treating her in that way, which is also gross because people's cultures are so fucking cool, and there's no reason that we should be telling people that they need to disown their culture to live here. God, cultures are so amazing. I don't know. Anyways. And interestingly, that experience with my mom gave her the perspective as an immigrant that people of color were being bad by trying to embrace their own culture and asking, like, my mom was like, why do black people dress like that? Why do black people behave like that? If they just did what I did and assimilated and tried to dress and act like white people, then people wouldn't be as racist to them. Why are they doing that? And I had to explain to my mom, like, Mom, it doesn't matter how white they act, their skin will never turn white. Like, people will be able to see the difference. And my mom had that had never like clicked with my mom before. Oh, plasma. My best friend also passes white and also is Latinx, and yeah, I get that. Alpha, never apologize for not being on as often as you want. You know we're fine. You know we're good. You can slightly relate with what I say? Interesting. In Italy. It's interesting that you can relate with it in Italy. I really don't know what the racial dynamics in Italy are like. I feel like maybe that's the thing that all minorities or non-whites go through. I wouldn't want to say that all go through it because I have no idea. There's so many different perspectives among the POC community. I do know that a lot of people go through something similar to me, but not all. You're wrong thinking America accepts white or foreign cultures compared to non-white cultures. You are not wrong. That is correct. America does do that a lot more easily. Yes. Ooh, anthropology, nice. I was very interested in anthropology. I didn't end up studying it, but I did find it really fascinating. Raised white culture. Not a lot of people could understand, but you're feeling very heard. Oh, no problem, Riverend. Yeah, yes, raised white culture. Yeah, that's what I was as well. Mm-hmm. Yeah, America now accepts whiter foreign cultures much more. I mean, just look at the way that we are allowing, like, just look at our overall. Again, this is also something that the book touches upon because the book goes briefly into racism. Man, now I'm like, maybe I should just read chapter 3 if we have time. But the book does go into racism that Asians and Native Americans and Latinx and like it touches on that. Not deeply, because obviously this man doesn't have personal experience with that, but it does touch on that. Hey, Connor. Yes. Yeah. And maybe there is a different chapter. God, it was so hard to pick the different chapters that I picked for today because every single portion of this book has such important points. And oh, yeah. Yeah, God. See, this is why diversity and media representation is so important. No worries, persnickety. Well, there's always the VOD, Connor. And also always buying the book yourself. If you guys don't have the funds to get the book, I can't do this for everybody. If you don't have the funds to get the book and you want the book to read the book, let me know. I can't do it for everybody, but I can do it for a couple people. Let Zach know? Okay. Or let us both know. Yeah. Yes, if that's a thing. Oh, Harvest. I'm good. Starts dancing. I'm so good. You're so white. I keep forgetting you're Hispanic until you speak Spanish. Ew. Gross. I know that that's not meant poorly, but as a person who has oh gosh, this is a thing that's really interesting. My blackness never came into play amongst my white friends until they needed my blackness to make a joke, to make like a black joke at my expense. They never saw color, and they never wanted to listen to me talk about race until it got time for them to make a black joke, and then they were so excited to own me as black so that they could make a joke at my expense. Yay! So that doesn't happen anymore, but that's just, there's a lot of like subtle ways that people don't know that racism plays out. That is like, cause they didn't think they were doing anything wrong, cause they were just imitating stuff they had seen. And like, I didn't realize they were doing anything wrong until a couple years in. So. Everyone's just like, eep. Yeah. So again, this is part of the reason why when like we discuss race and like I ask, do you guys have questions? I'm not gonna judge you. I mean, sometimes, and I'm not perfect. Sometimes I do get a little bit worked up by some of the implications that like not by the question being asked, but like, I'm like, God, this particular idea about black people makes me so angry. You know what I mean? So I'm like not mad at somebody for asking the question, but I am like, God, that's a really frustrating one. But like, I had to go through it all. You know what I mean? I had to go through realizing that I was racist and realizing how deep racism was and realizing how much I had been affected in my life that I was ignoring. And I'm not going to judge you guys for also being on that path. God, yeah. Tetsuki, yeah. Yeah. I can kind of relate. Not fully relate, but I can kind of relate based off of my own dynamics. Yeah, insulting when someone wants to learn a different language. I've never thought about it, but that's fair, aggro. That's fair. Yeah. I'm sure that like everybody's gonna have their own time of like, wow, remember when I learned that racism existed? What an awful period of time that was in my life. That's definitely very real. All right, so I'm gonna skip off to the next chapter that we're gonna read. Tetsuki! There's a whole chapter in this book that's all about that. There's a whole chapter in this book that's all about that. There's a whole chapter in this book that is about black people being racist towards African immigrants and where that comes from. And it like goes further into the whole Reagan administration, assimilationist. It goes further into that and explores it more. I've been recommending this book to people. And again, no problem, aggro. And it goes into these things like, here, I just want to say that the chapter names are based off of the different kinds of racism that it examines. So it goes into like biological racism. It goes into ethnic racism. It goes into cultural racism. It goes into behavioral racism. It goes into colorism. And as you've seen from like me reading these chapters, it's fairly comprehensible as you read through it. It's like fairly like, oh, I see what you're saying. I didn't think about how racism applies in that context, but it totally does. I very much recommend. Yes, Ibram X. Kendi. Yes. It's in physical copy. It's like sold out literally everywhere. But if you have a cell phone, you can read it on ebook. Okay. So, I'm gonna start reading chapter 8 because I was really excited to get to read this to people. Now, this book does a really good job of like introducing concepts that you need to know ahead of time and then like building upon them by each chapter. Oh, nice, persnickety. So we're skipping like a bunch of chapters here. And again, if anything is not making sense because we skipped chapters and we skipped over, like, this book kind of follows a narrative of his life. So we've also skipped over chunks of his life. If that affects how easy it is to understand, please just let me know. And also, please feel free to keep chatting to each other while I'm reading. You don't have to go silent just because I'm reading. Okay. Chapter 8. Oh, hang on. Oh, was it a summer class? Was it like an African American history summer class? All right, no problem, Tetsuki. Ah. That must have been a really hard space to suddenly be dumped
I'll
into.
support you.
Hey! Oh! I do remember you, this awkward person. Thank you for resubscribing. Welcome back to the fold. I am staying safe. Thanks for popping in. There's something for summer research. Okay. Interesting. Yeah. Whew. That's interesting because I feel like I can understand what your professor was trying to do with that class. But like, yeah. Interesting. So what was he teaching then? What was the class teaching? It didn't come across as showing whites racism. Well, that's good, I guess. I'm sorry, I'll just let you respond. Oh. I'm fine. That's nice to hear. That's nice to hear, this awkward person. It's hard to put into words. Yes, it is hard to put into words. I have an image in my head. I don't know if the image in my head is matching what you actually experienced, but I'm understanding that basically the professor was trying to create a space that was more for the black students to like learn and discuss this kind of thing. And basically, and I'm guessing here, the professor was trying to create a space where black students would voice their experiences, and maybe the white students were just supposed to listen, and maybe he never expressed that that's what he was doing, but it's at least it seems like that's what the atmosphere of that behavior would create would be. I don't know. Okay. Okay, yeah. Actually, well, that's just untrue. Phew. All right, yeah, got it. So, black self-reliance, got it. That's part of what that was. Interesting. Well, this is actually going to touch on the idea that we're going to talk about in this chapter. That essentially, how do I say this? I won't say it. I'll let the chapter. There's something in there that I want to say about like different black people's approaches to combating the problems that they see in their communities, and like clearly, this man took a certain approach that he thought was effective, and there are criticisms that can be made of that approach. I think clearly that there are, because I don't necessarily agree with his perspective like at all, but I think that's a racist perspective, but hopefully this chapter will go into it a little bit more. So, chapter 8, behavior. Again with definitions. Behavioral racist. One who is making individuals responsible for the perceived behavior of racial groups and making racial groups responsible for the behavior of individuals. behavioral anti-racist. One who is making racial group behavior fictional and individual behavior real. Again, we skipped a bunch of the book, so the beginning might not make as much sense, but don't worry about it. I did eventually make friends. An interracial group who arrived just as my old gear from the Ave became too small for my growing body. I lost the purity of my New York accent and jump shot, but I found living, breathing, laughing friends, like Chris, Maya, Jovan, and Brandon. So for clarity, he has moved from New York City to Virginia, I believe. And he was like struggling to make friends because what the last chapter talks about is that he was like, I'm real superior to other black folk. And he like goes into why he felt that way and why that's not okay. And then this chapter happens. My schoolwork did not recover. I never bothered much with class back in Queens. I skipped classes at John Bound to play spades in the lunchroom and tuned out teachers like they were bad commercials, doing just enough classwork to stay married to basketball. I was definitely not living up to my academic potential, and as a black teenager in the 90s, my shortcomings didn't go unnoticed or unjudged. The first to notice were the adults around me of my parents' and grandparents' generation. As legal scholar James Foreman Jr. documents, the civil rights generation usually evoked Martin Luther King Jr. to shame us. Did Martin Luther King successfully fight the likes of Bull Connor so that we could ultimately lose the struggle for civil rights to misguided or malicious members of our own race? Asked Washington, D.C. prosecutor Eric Holder at an MLK birthday celebration in 1995. You are costing everybody's freedom, Jesse Jackson told a group of Alabama prisoners that year. You can rise above this if you change your mind, he added. I appeal to you. Your mother appealed to you. Dr. King died for you. The so-called first black president followed suit. It isn't racist for whites to say they don't understand why people put up with gangs on the corner or in the projects or with drugs being sold in the schools or in the open, said President Clinton in 1995. It's not racist for whites to assert that the culture of welfare dependency, out-of-wedlock pregnancy, and absent fatherhood cannot be broken by social programs unless there is first more personal responsibility. Black people needed to stop playing race cards, the phrase Peter Collier and David Horowitz used to brand Talk of Race and Racism in 1997. The issue was personal irresponsibility. Indeed, I was irresponsible in high school. It makes anti-racist sense to talk about the personal irresponsibility of individuals like me of all races. I screwed up. I could have studied harder. But some of my white friends could have studied harder too, and their failures and irresponsibility didn't somehow tarnish their race. My problems with personal irresponsibility were exacerbated, or perhaps even caused, by the additional struggles that racism added to my life, from a history of disinterested racist teachers to overcrowded schools to the daily racist attacks that fell on young black boys and girls. And again, he has provided context for those claims in previous chapters. There's no question that I could have hurdled that racism and kept on running. But asking every non-athletic black person to become an Olympic hurdler and blaming them when they can't keep up is racist. One of racism's harms is the way it falls on the unexceptional black person who is asked to be extraordinary just to survive. And, even worse, the black screw-up who faces the abyss after one error, while the white screw-up is handed second chances and empathy. This shouldn't be surprising. One of the fundamental values of racism to white people is that it makes success attainable for even unexceptionable whites, while success, even moderate success, is usually reserved for extraordinary black people. How do we think about my young self, the C or D student, in anti-racist terms? The truth is that I should be critiqued as a student. I was undermotivated and distracted and undisciplined. In other words, a bad student. But I shouldn't be critiqued as a bad black student. I did not represent my race any more than my irresponsible white classmates represented theirs. It makes racist sense to talk about personal irresponsibility as it applies to an entire racial group. Racialized group behavior is a figment of the racist's imagination. Individual behaviors can shape the success of individuals, but policies determine the success of groups. And it is racist power that creates the policies that cause racial inequities. Making individuals responsible for the perceived behavior of racial groups and making whole racial groups responsible for the behavior of individuals are the two ways that behavioral racism infects our perception of the world. In other words, when we believe that a racial group's seeming success or failure redounds to each of its individual members, we've accepted a racist idea. Likewise, when we believe that an individual's seeming success or failure redounds to an entire group, we've accepted a racist idea. These two racist ideas were common currency in the 1990s. Progressive Americans, the one who self-identified as not racist, had abandoned biological racism by the mid-1990s. They had gone further. Mostly they'd abandoned ethnic racism, bodily racism, and cultural racism. But they were still sold on behavioral racism. And they carried its torch unwaveringly, right up until the present. The same behavioral racism drove many of the Trump voters, whom these same not racist progressives vociferously opposed in the 2016 election. They too ascribed qualities to entire groups. These were voters whose political choice correlated with their belief that black people are ruder, lazier, stupider, and crueler than white people. America's black community has turned America's major cities into slums because of laziness, drug use, and sexual promiscuity, fancied Reverend Jamie Johnson, director of a faith-based center in Trump's Department of Homeland Security after the election. Although black civil rights leaders like to point to a supposedly racist criminal justice system to explain why our prisons house so many black men, it's been obvious for decades that the real culprit is black behavior, argued Jason Riley in 2016. 2016! Every time someone racializes behavior, describes something as black behavior, they are expressing a racist idea. To be an anti-racist is to recognize there is no such thing as racial behavior. To be an anti-racist is to recognize there is no such thing as black behavior, let alone irresponsible black behavior. Black behavior is as fictitious as black genes. There is no black gene. No one has ever scientifically established a single black behavioral trait. No evidence has ever been produced, for instance, to prove that black people are louder, angrier, nicer, funnier, lazier, less punctual, more immoral, religious, or dependent. That Asians are more subservient. That whites are greedier. All we have are stories of individual behavior, but individual stories are only proof of the behavior of individuals. Just as race doesn't exist biologically, race doesn't exist behaviorally. But what about the argument that clusters of black people in the South, or Asian Americans in New York's Chinatown, or white people in the Texas suburbs seem to behave in ways that follow coherent, definable cultural practices? Anti-racism means separating the idea of a culture from the idea of a behavior. Culture defines a group tradition that a particular racial group might share, but that is not shared among all individuals in that racial group or among all racial groups. Behavior defines the inherent human traits and potential that everyone shares. Humans are intelligent and lazy, even as that intelligence and laziness might appear differently across the racialized cultural groups. Behavioral racists see it differently from anti-racists, and even from each other. In the decades before the Civil War, behavioral racists argued over whether it was freedom or slavery that caused supposed mediocre black behavior. To pro-slavery theorists, black behavioral deficiencies stemmed from freedom, either in Africa or among emancipated slaves in America. In the states that retained the ancient relation between white mastery and black slavery, blacks had improved greatly in every respect, in numbers, comfort, intelligence, and morals. Secretary of State John C. Calhoun explained to a British critic in 1844. This pro-slavery position held after slavery. Freed blacks, cut off from the spirit of white society, their civilizing masters, had degenerated into the original African type, with behavioral traits ranging from hypersexuality, immorality, criminality, and laziness to poor parenting. Philip Alexander Bruce maintained in his popular 1889 book, The Plantation Negro as a Freeman. In contrast, abolitionists, including Benjamin Rush in 1773, argued, all the vices which are charged upon the Negroes in the southern colonies and the West Indies, such as idleness, treachery, theft, and the like, are the genuine offspring of slavery. A year later, Rush founded the budding nation's first white anti-slavery society. Prefacing Frederick Douglass's slave narrative in 1845, abolitionist William Lloyd Garrison stated that slavery degraded black people in the scale of humanity. Nothing has been left undone to cripple their intellects, darken their minds, debase their moral nature, obliterate all traces of their relationship to mankind. Abolitionists, or rather progressive assimilationists, conjured what I call the oppression inferiority thesis. In their well-meaning efforts to persuade Americans about the horrors of oppression, assimilationists argue that oppression has degraded the behaviors of oppressed people. This belief extended into the period after slavery. In his address to the founding meeting of Alexander Crummell's American Negro Academy in 1897, W.E.B. Du Bois pictured the first and greatest step toward the settlement of the present friction between the races lies in the correction of the immorality, crime, and laziness among the Negroes themselves, which still remains as a heritage of slavery. This framing of slavery as a demoralizing force was the mirror image of the Jim Crow historians' framing of slavery as a civilizing force. Both positions led Americans toward behavioral racism. Black behavior demoralized by freedom, or freed black behavior demoralized by slavery. The latest expression of the oppression inferiority thesis is known as post-traumatic slave syndrome, or PTSS. Black infighting, materialism, poor parenting, colorism, defeatism, rage, these dysfunctional and negative behaviors, as well as many others, are in large part related to transgenerational adaptations associated with the past traumas of slavery and ongoing oppression, maintains psychologist Joy DeGruy in her 2005 book, Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome. Some people believe, based on misleading studies, that these transgenerational adaptations are genetic. Ugh. DeGruy claimed many African Americans suffer from PTSS. She built this theory on anecdotal evidence and modeled it on post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. But studies show that many people who endure traumatic environments don't contract post-traumatic stress disorder. Researchers found that among soldiers returning from Iraq and Afghanistan, PTSD rates ranged from 13.5 to 30%. Black individuals have, of course, suffered trauma from slavery and ongoing oppression. Some individuals throughout history have exhibited negative behaviors related to this trauma. DeGruy is a hero for ushering the constructs of trauma, damage, and healing into our understanding of Black life. But there is a thin line between an anti-racist saying individual Blacks have suffered trauma and a racist saying Blacks are a traumatized people. There is similarly a thin line between an anti-racist saying slavery was debilitating and a racist saying Blacks are a debilitated people. The latter constructions erase whole swaths of history. For instance, the story of even the first generation of emancipated Black people, who moved straight from plantations into the Union Army, into politics, labor organizing, union leagues, artistry, entrepreneurship, club building, church building, school building, community building, buildings more commonly razed by the fiery hand of racist terrorism than by any self-destructive hand of behavioral deficiencies derived from the trauma of slavery. Increasingly in the 20th century, social scientists replaced slavery with segregation and discrimination as the oppressive hand ravaging Black behavior. Psychoanalysts Abram Gardiner and Lionel Ovesey expressed this alarm in their 1951 tome, The Mark of Oppression, a psychosocial study of the American Negro. There is not one personality trait of the Negro, the source of which cannot be traced into his difficult living condition. They wrote, "The final result is a wretched internal life, a crippled self-esteem, a vicious self-hatred, the conviction of unlovability, the diminution of affectivity, and the uncontrolled hostility." Widely taken as scientific fact, these sweeping generalizations were based on the author's interviews with all of 25 subjects. As a struggling Black teenager in the 90s, I felt suffocated by a sense of being judged, primarily by the people I was closest to. Other Black people, particularly older Black people who were worried over my entire generation. The Black judge, in my mind, did not leave any room for the mistakes of Black individuals. I didn't just have to deal with the consequences of my personal failings. I had the added burden of letting down the entire race. Our mistakes were generalized as the mistakes of the race. It seemed that white people were free to misbehave, make mistakes. But if we failed, or failed to be twice as good, then the black judge handed down a hard sentence. No probation or parole. There was no middle ground. We were either king's disciples or thugs killing king's dream. But of course, while that may have felt true in a larger social sense, individual black parents responded as individuals. My own parents privately etched out probationary middle grounds for their own children. I did not make Ma and Dad proud, but they didn't treat me as a thug and lock me away. They kept trying. When I was in 11th grade at Stonewall Jackson, my parents nudged me into International Baccalaureate IB classes, and even though I didn't have particularly high expectations for myself, I went along with it. I entered the sanctimonious world of IB, surrounded by a sea of white and Asian students. This environment only made my hatred of school more intense, if now for a different reason. I felt stranded, save for an occasional class with my friend Maya, a black teen preparing for Spelman College. None of my white and Asian classmates came to save me. Rarely opening my lips or raising my hand, I shaped myself according to what I thought they believed about me. I felt like a person in a leaky boat as they sailed by me every day on their way to standardized test prep sessions, Ivy League dreams, and competitions for teachers' praises. I saw myself through their eyes, an imposter, deserving of invisibility. My drowning in the supposed sea of advanced intelligence was imminent. Imposter syndrome based on race is a real thing. Or based on internalized racism, I should say. I internalized my academic struggles as indicative of something wrong, not just with my behavior, but with black behavior as a whole. Since I represented the race, both in their eyes, or what I thought I saw in their eyes, and in my own. The so-called Nations Report Card told Americans the same story. It first reported the math scores of 8th and 4th graders in 1990, the year I entered 3rd grade. Asian 4th graders scored 37 points, whites 32 points, and Latinx 21 points higher than black 4th graders on the standardized math test. By 2017, the scoring gaps in 4th grade mathematics had slightly narrowed. The racial achievement gap in reading between white and black 4th graders also narrowed between 1990 and 2017, but widened between white and black 12th graders. In 2015, blacks had the lowest mean SAT scores of any racial group. As a high school student, I believed standardized tests effectively measured smarts, and therefore my white and Asian classmates were smarter than me. I thought I was a fool. Clearly, I needed another shaming lesson about how King died for me. Not until my senior year in college did I realize I was a fool for thinking I was a fool. I was preparing for my last major standardized test, the Graduate Record Exam, or GRE. I had already forked over $1,000 for a preparatory course feeding the U.S. test prep and private tutoring industry that would grow to $12 billion in 2014 and is projected to reach $17.5 billion in 2020. The courses and private tutors are concentrated in Asian and white communities, who, not surprisingly, score the highest on standardized tests. My GRE prep course, for instance, was not taught on my historically black campus. I had to trek over to the campus of a historically white college in Tallahassee. I sat surrounded by white students before a white teacher at Florida State University, a flashback to my lonely boat at Stonewall Jackson. I wondered why I was the only black student in the room, and about my own economic privilege and the presumed economic privilege of my fellow students. I wondered about another stratum of students who weren't even in the room, the ones who could pay for private tutoring with this teacher. The teacher boasted the course would boost our GRE scores by 200 points, which I didn't pay much attention to at first. It seemed an unlikely advertising pitch, but with each class the technique behind the teacher's confidence became clearer. She wasn't making us smarter so we'd ace the test. She was teaching us how to take the test. On the way home from the class, I typically stopped by the gym to lift weights. When I first started weightlifting, I naturally assumed the people lifting the heaviest weights were the strongest people. I assumed wrong. To lift the most required a combination of strength and the best form. One was based on ability, the other on access to the best information and training. Well-trained lifters with exquisite form lifted heavier weights than similarly or even better endowed lifters with poorer form. This regular commute from the GRE prep course to the weight room eventually jarred me into clarity. The teacher was not making us stronger, she was giving us form and technique so we'd know precisely how to carry the weight of the test. It revealed the bait and switch at the heart of standardized tests, the exact thing that made them unfair. she was teaching test-taking form for standardized exams that purportedly measured intellectual strength. My classmates and I would get higher scores, 200 points as promised, than poorer students, who might be equivalent in intellectual strength, but did not have the resources, or in some cases even the awareness, to acquire better form through high-priced prep courses. Because of the way the human mind works, the so-called attribution effect, which drives us to take personal credit for any success, those of us who prepped for the test would score higher and then walk into better opportunities thinking it was all about us, that we were better and smarter than the rest, and we even had inarguable, quantifiable proof. Look at our scores! Admissions counselors and professors would assume we were better qualified and admit us into their graduate schools while also boosting their institutional rankings. And because we're talking about featureless, objective numbers, no one would ever think that racism could have played a role. The use of standardized tests to measure aptitude and intelligence is one of the most effective racist policies ever devised to degrade black minds and legally exclude black bodies. We degrade black minds every time we speak of an academic achievement gap based on these numbers. The acceptance of an academic achievement gap is just the latest method of reinforcing the oldest racist idea, black intellectual inferiority. The idea of an achievement gap means there is a disparity in academic performance between groups of students. Implicit in this idea is that academic achievement, as measured by statistical instruments like test scores and dropout rates, is the only form of academic achievement. There is an even more sinister implication in achievement gap talk, that disparities in academic achievement accurately reflect disparities in intelligence among racial groups. Intellect is the linchpin of behavior, and the racist idea of the achievement gap is the linchpin of behavioral racism. Remember, to believe in a racial hierarchy is to believe in a racist idea. The idea of an achievement gap between the races, with whites and Asians at the top and blacks and Latinx at the bottom, creates a racial hierarchy with its implication that the racial gap in test scores means something is wrong with the black and Latinx test takers and not the tests. From the beginning, the tests, not the people, have always been the racial problem. I know this is a hard idea to accept. So many well-meaning people have tried to solve this problem of the racial achievement gap. But once we understand the history and policies behind it, it becomes clear. The history of race and standardized testing begins in 1869 when English statistician Francis Galton, a half-cousin of Charles Darwin, hypothesized in Hereditary Genius that the average intellectual standard of the Negro race is some 2 grades below our own. Galton pioneered eugenics decades later, but failed to develop a testing mechanism that verified his racist hypothesis. Where Galton failed, France's Alfred Binet and Theodore Simon succeeded when they developed an IQ test in 1905 that Stanford psychologist Lewis Terman revised and delivered to Americans in 1916. These experimental tests would show enormously significant racial differences in general intelligence, differences which cannot be wiped out by any scheme of mental culture, the eugenicist said in his 1916 book, The Measurement of Intelligence. Terman's IQ test was first administered on a major scale to 1.7 million U.S. soldiers during World War I. Princeton psychologist Carl C. Brigham presented the soldiers' racial scoring gaps as evidence of genetic racial hierarchy in A Study of American Intelligence, published 3 years before he created the Scholastic Aptitude Test, or SAT, in 1926. Aptitude means natural ability. Brigham, like other eugenicists, believed the SAT would reveal the natural intellectual ability of white people. Physicist William Shockley and psychologist Arthur Jensen carried these eugenic ideas into the 1960s. By then, genetic explanations, if not the tests and the achievement gap itself, had largely been discredited. Segregationists pointing to inferior genes had been overwhelmed in the racist debate over the cause of the achievement gap by assimilationists pointing to inferior environments. Liberal assimilationists shifted the discourse to closing the achievement gap, powering the testing movement into the 90s when the bell curve controversy erupted in 1994 over whether the gap could be closed. The bell curve is a very particular issue that a lot of people in the alt-right and like white supremacists stations tend to pick. It's a book that claims to be scientific, but it is an extremely, extremely flawed on so many levels. Like it's been debunked. Like, most scientists do not count it anymore. It's very bad. If you want to know more, there is a really good explanation of why the statistics in the bell curve are considered bunk by most scientists. And that is it's on YouTube. It's called The Bell Curve. It's by a guy named Sean. It's like 2 hours long. You don't even have to listen to all of it to get the point. He just goes through, like, step by step all of the different flaws. And they're, like, listed out. So if that interests you, or if you have, like, a family member who really loves to bring up the bell curve as a thing, I recommend that video. That just send it, just throw it at them. Throw it at him. Just putting it out there. Bell curve sucks. Also, Warren, I am glad that you made it home safe. But continuing on, let's discover why the bell curve sucks. The racist idea of an achievement gap lived on... Oh wait, sorry. I skipped a chunk. It's a quote. Thank you, Connor. It seems highly likely to us that both genes and the environment have something to do with racial differences in test scores, wrote Harvard psychologist Richard Herrnstein and political scientist Charles Murray in The Bell Curve. The racist idea of an achievement gap lived on into the new millennium through George W. Bush's No Child Left Behind Act and Obama's Race to the Top and Common Core, initiatives that further enlarged the role of standardized testing in determining the success and failure of students and the schools they attended. Through these initiatives and many, many others, education reformers banged the drum of the achievement gap to get attention and funding for their equalizing efforts. But what if, all along, these well-meaning efforts at closing the achievement gap have been opening the door to racist ideas? What if different environments lead to different kinds of achievement rather than different levels of achievement? What if the intellect of a low-testing black child in a poor black school is different from, and not inferior to, the intellect of a high-testing white child in a rich white school? What if we measured intelligence by how knowledgeable individuals are about their own environments? What if we measured intellect by an individual's desire to know? What if we realized the best way to ensure an effective educational system is not by standardizing our curricula and tests, but by standardizing the opportunities available to all students? In Pennsylvania, a recent statewide study found that at any given poverty level, districts with a higher proportion of white students received significantly more funding than districts with more students of color. The chronic underfunding of black schools in Mississippi is a gruesome sight to behold. Schools lack basic supplies, basic textbooks, healthy food and water. The lack of resources leads directly to diminished opportunities for learning. In other words, the racial problem is the opportunity gap, as anti-racist reformers call it, not the achievement gap. Back in high school, those final days in 1999 were taking forever. I sat bored during my free time in my government class. As my mind wandered, my eyes wandered and latched on to Angela sitting behind me. Brown-skinned, with high cheekbones and a sweet disposition, Angela appeared to be writing intently. "What are you doing?" I asked. "I'm writing my speech," she said with her usual smile, not looking up from her writing. "Speech for what?" "For the MLK contest. You haven't heard?" I shook my head, and so she told me all about the Prince William County Martin Luther King Jr. oratorical contest. Stonewall Jackson participants would give their speeches in 2 days. Stonewall's winner would go on to the county competition. The top 3 finalists would speak at the Hilton Chapel on MLK Day in 2000. She urged me to participate. At first I declined, but by the time she finished with me, I was in. The prompt for the contest was, what would be Dr. King's message for the millennium? And what came to my pen were all the racist ideas about black youth behavior circulating in the 1990s that, without realizing, I had deeply internalized. I started writing an anti-black message that would have filled King with indignity, less like King himself, and more like the shaming speeches about King that I heard so often from adults of my parents' generation. If only I'd spent more time listening to King instead of all the adults who claimed to speak for him. "We must no longer be ashamed of being black," King would have told me, as he told a gathering of black people in 1967. "As long as the mind is enslaved, the body can never be free." As long as the mind thinks there is something behaviorally wrong with a racial group, the mind can never be anti-racist. As long as the mind oppresses the oppressed by thinking their oppressive environment has retarded their behavior, the mind can never be anti-racist. As long as the mind is racist, the mind can never be free. To be anti-racist is to think nothing is behaviorally wrong or right, inferior or superior with any of the racial groups. Whenever the anti-racist sees individuals behaving positively or negatively, the anti-racist sees exactly that. Individuals behaving positively or negatively, not representatives of whole races. To be anti-racist is to de-racialize behavior, to remove the tattooed stereotype from every racialized body. Behavior is something humans do, not races do. I finished a draft of the speech that night. "Let me hear it," Angela excitedly asked the next day before our government class. "Hear what?" I said shyly, turning around and knowing exactly what. "Your speech," she beamed. "I know you got it there. Let me hear it." Feeling obligated, I slowly recited my speech. The more I read, the more confidence I felt. The racist ideas sounded so good, so right, as racist ideas normally do. When I finished, Angela was ecstatic. "You're going to win! You're going to win!" she chanted softly as class started. I kept turning around and telling her to stop. Angela saw my smiles and did not. I did not sleep much that night. Between fine-tuning my speech and quieting my nerves and fears, I had too much going on in my mind. I fell eventually into a deep sleep, so deep I did not hear my alarm. When I awoke, I realized I had missed the competition. Upset but also relieved, I made my way to school. Angela was waiting for me at the competition all morning. After the last participant had spoken to the Stonewall judges, Angela demanded they reconvene when I arrived at school, and she did not take no from them, the same as she didn't take no from me. And sure enough, when I got to school, the judges reconvened for me. Hearing all that Angela did, a storm surge of gratitude washed away my fears and nerves. I was determined to give the speech of my life. And I did. I won. Racist ideas and all. Winning started to melt away the shame I felt for myself and my race regarding my academic struggles. The black judge was proud of me. I was more than proud of myself. But my racist insecurity started transforming into racist conceit. The transformation had actually already started when I decided to attend Florida A&M University. It felt right, I told people. I did not disclose to anyone or myself why this historically black university felt right. On my visit during the summer of 1999, everyone gushed about Florida A&M as the biggest and baddest HBCU, historically black college and university, in the land. Time magazine and the Princeton Review had named it College of the Year in 1997. For the second time in 3 years, Florida A&M had outpaced Harvard in its recruitment of National Achievement Scholars, the best of black high school students. President Frederick S. Humphreys, a 6'5" bundle of charisma, had personally recruited many of those students while growing his university into the nation's largest HBCU. Whenever we say something just feels right or wrong, we're evading the deeper, perhaps hidden ideas that inform our feelings. But in those hidden places we find what we really think, if we have the courage to face our own naked truths. I did not look within myself to see why Florida A&M just felt right. A reason beyond my desire to be around black excellence. The truth is, I wanted to flee misbehaving black folk. Florida A&M became for me the best of blackness, all right. I could never have imagined the enrapturing sound of blackness at its peak. 2 weeks after landing on campus, I heard it in all its glory. And that's the end of chapter 8. And it goes into, transitions really nicely into chapter 9. But yes, that's the end of chapter 8. How we feeling? How we feeling? I'm surprised this book is a lot easier to read aloud than Jane Eyre was. Well, I'm not very surprised, but feeling woke. Oh, cheers, STL. Yeah. Remember what I was talking about earlier in this stream about how, like, everybody has a moment that they get to look back on when they realized how deep the racial hole goes and how deeply entrenched it is in everything? It's kind of a bad time, but it's a bad time because it feels bad, but it is a deeply empowering time when you realize these things. For both in terms of like what you now know and that you're going to be able to work with, that you're going to be able to inform others about, that you're going to be able to work against in whatever sphere that you work in, but also for people of color, learning about racism and how deep it goes is important, because you will be able to learn and realize why you felt stupid or crazy or bad or shameful, or you will realize all of the different stereotypes that you may have internalized in the course of being raised in a racist world. And that's important for people of color. Like, it's important for people of color to educate themselves too, so that they understand that those ideas that they have, that they might not even know that they have, aren't true, and that they don't need to look at themselves in that way. Yeah, Harvest? Harvest, yes, I saw that and it made me so happy. Why do we have statues of slave traders? The feeling of being a good person makes up for the pain of knowing you were a bad person before. As this book said earlier, racist and anti-racist are descriptions of behavior and descriptions of thought, and you can be one or the other at any given moment. Like, there will be times that you will lapse back into racist thoughts or things just because, you know, and like, if that happens, don't be too hard on you. Like, don't be like, I'm a horrible person. Like, I really want, like, that's what I'm trying to do here. I really want everybody to acknowledge that racism is like a message that we are told about each other and about ourselves and about the world at large, and like, and so many aspects of life, about like art and history and culture and education, and it's something that we're told and we're programmed to believe, and it takes a while to deprogram yourself and to become better, and you're gonna mess up. And that doesn't mean that you're a horrible, terrible person. It means you grew up in a horrible, terrible system, and you're hopefully continuing to actively fight against it. I mean, I guess if you grew up in a horrible, terrible system and you did the research and you know it's horrible and terrible, and then you keep doing it, that is really bad, and I will condemn you if you do that, so don't do that. Mm-hmm. There's been a lot of there's actually been a recent movement to abolish SAT and ACT scores for getting into college, because of how much they favor people with money. They don't even just favor like white people and Asian people. They favor people with money. You need money. Like, my life is an indication of this. I told my parents that I didn't want to work in high school, and first of all, privilege, but I didn't want to work while I was in high school. I didn't physically feel well enough to do that, so I told my dad, hey, if I get a scholarship to college, like, I won't work, but in return I'll get a scholarship to college. And because of that, and because my parents had money, and because I went to this good white school, and because of all these things, I was able to take the standardized test. I was able to take the ACT multiple times. I was able to practice for it over the course of multiple years, and I was able to attend test-taking seminars that taught me how to take the test. There was specifically the science portion of the test I never really did good in. I took this test-taking course. They told me how to do it. They said, it's the same thing as the reading section of the ACT. It's the same thing. It's not actually testing your science knowledge. It's testing how well you read graphs. And that knowledge was enough to get my ACT score to 33, which is over 32, which you need it to be over 32 if you want to get any kind of scholarship to a college. So because my parents could afford to help me take that class, and also could afford to have me retake the ACT, because it costs money to take the ACT, I got a good enough grade that I was able to get a scholarship and not pay for my college. And like, sure, some of that has to do with like me being a hard worker and stuff, but like a lot more of it has to do with the fact that my parents could pay for it. You know what I mean? Damn, nice STL. All right. All right. Yeah, I wasn't as good at the science. Hang on, I'm going back to read. Oh, Melody, yeah. 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 My my high school was interesting because like I lived in like a town, in just like a big town. And we only had one real high school, and then we had the Christian high school, which is where all the rich people went. All the rich people were in the Christian high school. There were rich people in my high school too. But what was interesting about it was that in middle school, there were two different middle schools, and there was the rich middle school and there was the poor middle school. And my parents specifically chose my neighborhood so that I'd be able to go to the rich middle school. And meanwhile, the poor middle school did not get the same amount of funding. It was like I had like one of my best friend from elementary school went to the poor middle school, and because of like busing, or they were trying to be like, oh, look at the demographics, we're really doing it, give us funding. So she got bused to the poor middle school, and I like the difference in between the cultures and the like funding and the access and like how much the teachers cared, how much the teachers even bothered wanting to try. It was incredible. It was incredible. Like this other school, the atmosphere there, like I couldn't walk into that building without feeling like every teacher was breathing down my neck expecting me to do something bad. They were expecting me to like to be violent. They were expecting me to have drugs. They were expecting me to skip class. They were expecting you to do all the bad things. Totally different in the school that I went to. School that I went to, teachers would see you walking out in the hallway and would like look at you, and if you looked like you weren't doing anything bad, they'd be like, nice, good job. Like they would just like let you walk around in the hallways because they assumed you were out there for a good reason. It's incredible. I think that the pandemic is opening that argument. But it's just one of the things to be aware of, that there is a movement in the United States to reform the use of like SATs and ACTs and standardized testing to get into college. I'm pro that movement. Now that you guys know of that movement, you can make up your own minds about where you're at with the movement, but now you understand the like racist and anti-racist perspective on the tests and why some people are moving towards getting rid of those testings. What you expect of students you will get. Yeah, that's a lesson I learned from the Dalai Lama. It's like how you treat people is how they will, like, if you treat people like you expect them to be friends, the majority of the time they will be friendly to you. And it's especially true with like kids when you're in a position of authority. Um, yeah, so like schools that treat people poorly. Well, we've reached the end of the readings that I had specifically marked out for book club. Does anybody have like any questions or confusions that you wanted to talk about? There are more chapters of the book. I could read like an additional one or two. I don't I don't know. I'm open to hearing from you guys who have like been here, how you're feeling. Obviously, please buy the book. I am not here to try to remove sales of the book. Please buy it. If you're having troubles affording it, message me and I will try to see if I can get you a copy. No problem. Thank you all for being here, really. I always get a little bit nervous before I do stuff where it's like a big conversation about race. I was like, ooh, will anybody show up? Will people be upset? Hmm. Okay, cool. Good to know, Tatsuki. Yeah, learned a lot. Good, good, good. Good, good, good. Yeah. That's good. That's why I'm glad. This is like Star Shower and AC. Oh yeah, is it in the Discord, the code? Hell yeah. Yes. I check your library. All of the copies in the libraries around here are checked out, which is like heartwarming. It's heartwarming to see how much this book is sold out. It's really nice. The level of ingrained is staggering. Yeah. Cece, that is good, yes. Cece, the level of ingrained that is staggering. That, how do I say this? This is God. Sorry, hang on. Let me organize my thoughts for a second. Yes, the level of the how deeply ingrained racism is into our society is frankly staggering. And it's part of the reason that educating yourself about isms in general is so, so important, because people can tell you how racist the world is. And for the most part, again, looking back on my experience growing up pretending that I was white, for the most part, you will hear them out and you will remember the really big stuff. But if you don't do more research, you're not going to find out all of the ways that it impacts like every part, every facet of daily life, not just for people of color, but for white people too. It impacts everything. And if you don't know, you're not going to be able to see it. And then we have problems where people who aren't familiar, who haven't educated themselves, not just white people, but people of any demographic, look and are confused and are like, well, yeah, but this is just an isolated incident. Like, yeah, this policeman did this thing to George Floyd, but this is an isolated incident. One bad apple spoils the bunch. And and also probably George Floyd was a criminal anyways. Like, that's how you get those kinds of thoughts, because people only have the things that they were presented in school, and they're like, well, yeah, racism like was real, but I don't see that when I'm walking around anymore. Jackie Les, thank you for following. Enjoy your apprenticeship here. Racism basically ended in the 1960s. Yes. That is true. Because, like, people want to be like, racism is bad. And what racism is like walking up to minorities and yelling at them, or like going up to them and being like, you're not going to get the job because you're black. And like, it's just this like fascinating myth that white culture, white America tells itself, is that racism is big white men walking up to black people and being like, you're not allowed to live. And it's like, I mean, first of all, racism like that does exist, and exists in greater numbers than people think. My dad had a dog sicked on him not a few years ago by a white guy. So like, yeah, that does happen. But like, that's not the majority of racism. Like, we can't have a country that literally was established on an economic system that was inherently racist, and that had to like do a bunch of different things to justify the system, because it was like making them a lot of money. So they had to like do a lot of stuff to like be like, yeah, no, but like we still want the money. So like, black people, they bad? And because that's what was going on when all of our institutions were established, the police was established as basically for slave catching. Like, when you have the police established for slave catching, and then like, sure, maybe slavery ends, and maybe the Jim Crow, yes, and maybe the Jim Crow era ends, and maybe like Reconstruction is happening, or maybe the Civil Rights Movement happens. When you have that as the base of the police, it's not surprising then when hundreds of years later those biases are still in effect. The like horrific treatment is still in effect. The police, yeah, I'm really sorry to have to tell you this, but if you look into past history, even after slavery ended, the police were like real happy to like support the KKK and like torching towns of and murdering black folk. They were like real happy to just like stand around and let that happen, or aid them. And like, black people were all like, what you doing? And the police were like, my job. And black people were like, fuck. It's bad time. Check out COINTELPRO to learn more. Yeah. And I mean, like, the other thing is that like, in the history of racial protesting, like, we think of protests and we see riots, and people get upset when they see riots. They're like, God, no, why are you breaking stuff? We have to understand that the protests that we're seeing now are not in isolation in history. That, first of all, racial protests have been going all the way back, but that in the 1800s, racial protest was by whites against black people, and riots were by whites against black people for the most part. There were a couple isolated incidents, but for the most part, it would be like, black people are striking to try and get better wages. White people meet them at the place that they are striking with guns and clubs, and they're going to beat you up. Or black person is accused of whistling at a white lady. This is why they say to black men, don't whistle. White man is accused of whistling at a black lady. The entire population of a white town comes out to literally burn down an entire black town. Just everybody dead. Yes, whistling to any woman is awful, but aggro, the problem is that he wasn't whistling at any woman. He was just whistling. It's actually arguable whether he was even whistling. It's fine. But, like, this is the thing. So, the problem was that, especially in the Jim Crow era South and after the Jim Crow era, black men could not exist. Like, basically, if you were in the same vicinity of a white woman, you weren't safe. Like, if a white man saw you and thought you were looking at that white woman and thought you were looking at that white woman in a bad way, you were going to be lynched. You were going to die. There wasn't any, like, it's just like black men were like, I'm going to stay far the fuck away from white women because white men were really, it's... So there's also this very long history. I mean, whistling to any woman is awful, but I do... Collecting my thoughts again. There is also this history of, when we're talking about racial violence, the first response being to pop up. Like if I'm like, a black guy stole from a store, and then the police came and they killed him. The first response from people tends to be, well, stealing is bad. And it's like, yeah, but that's not the fucking point, though. That's not the fucking point. Just because people commit crimes and, like, first of all, let's go back to the foundations of our freaking nation. If you are arrested, it does not mean that you are convicted of the crime. You have to go to court and be convicted in a court of law because our government was founded on this principle that you have the right to defend yourself in court before somebody else can judge you and make a decision about your life without you being able to defend yourself. First of all, no matter what kind of criminal, they have the right to defend themselves in court. You don't have to like it, but that's the way it is. Second of all, why is that the first thing that we look at? I mean, I know the answer is racism, but, like, why is it that, like, there's so many, like, of my friends' white family members, they keep coming to me and being like, I'm trying to talk to my parents, but whenever I try to talk to them about this, the first thing that they go on is, well, he was a criminal. And it's like, why is black skin so inherently criminal to you? George Floyd, first of all, $20. It was a possibility. He forged $20, right? The person who owned the store called the police, then went outside and was like, hey, this is a fake $20. And George Floyd was like, you're right, I'm sorry, here's your product back, I'm gonna wait here for the police. That's what happened. So, like, sure, criminal. George Floyd is a criminal. Sure, he's a criminal. And we're gonna apply that label to him to dehumanize him so that we don't care anymore when people kill him. And people take a man and kill him. You know that wouldn't have happened if that man was white. Imagine if a white man was caught. Like, white teenagers do that all the time. Are you kidding me? I grew up in the suburbs. White teenagers do that shit all the time. They just steal shit all the time. It's fine. They don't get killed for it. They don't even get arrested for it. They don't even get the police called on them for it in the first place. I've been there when it happens. Oh, it's fine. Sorry, I got a little upset. Well, lynching is essentially done by the police now. I'm sorry. I mean, the KKK's still around. Hey, Tiny Star Sprout. Aw. No problem, Tiny Star Sprout. Sorry, you came in at a particularly charged time. I hope that that's all right. But yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. I do a book club every Sunday, and I stream games Tuesdays and Thursdays, so the games will be on display later in the week. God, Spurty Magoo, I know. You can't... Aw. Thank you for following Tiny Star Sprout. Enjoy your apprenticeship here. Even in the UK, it's the same. I mean, okay. Lethal response seems to be the answer to so many things. Lethal response seems to be the answer to so many things when it's a person of color is the only problem. You know, Ferguson? I believe it was Ferguson, where it was a hate crime. It was a white man who went into a church and attacked and killed like 8 people. Do you know what happened to that guy when he got arrested? Do you know what happened? The police arrested him. He was perfectly fine. And on the way to jail, he said, "Hey, I'm hungry." And it might not be Ferguson. Okay, got it. Ferguson was hands up, don't shoot. I'm sorry. I'm mixing things. I'm heated. But like, he said, "Hey, I'm hungry." And the police took him to McDonald's. The police took him to a McDonald's drive-thru. They gave him food. He was like, "Hey, I know I just murdered 8 people, but I'm a little hungry." Meanwhile, these black men in the backs of cars who have done what? I don't know. They've been accused of crimes. Certainly people love to look at the police and say, they wouldn't arrest someone for no reason. That's not true. But white people don't have the experience of police arresting you for no reason, so it makes sense to conclude, because in their world, if it was a white person, the black person, like a white person does have to do something wrong in order to be arrested by police. Black people don't. So white people look at the situation and they're like, he must have done something wrong. But people who are arrested for doing something wrong, for resisting arrest, for walking out on the street, or maybe for real crimes, maybe they stole something, maybe they're selling drugs, who knows, in the back of cars, can't fucking breathe, and don't have the dignity of being allowed to breathe. But this guy gets to eat a burger because he's hungry, and he just killed 8 people. Charleston. Thank you. I get Charleston mixed up because of the Charlottesville thing, and those 2 names, they blur together in my head, so I'm always like, well, the Charleston must have been, yeah, my bad. Yeah, exactly, aggro. Charleston. Ferguson was the time the cop killed the teenager who had his back turned. Okay. Well, great. Thank you for clarifying. I'm sorry that I said it incorrectly in the beginning. And it seems like white people usually turn out to be mass murderers much more often. In terms of like high profile shootings, yeah, it's a lot of white men. That's true. The label of criminality removes all of their humanity and removes the reasons they might be doing those things. Yeah. It's fair. Zach, I'm black. Come on. I mean, but yeah, I like just on a personal level. On a personal level, even disregarding anti-racist beliefs, but like just on a personal level, it's horrifying to me that because people are criminals criminals. Because people commit crimes, they're treated like they're no longer human. That's messed up. You know? And like, I'm not even saying that like, oh, all people who commit crimes, like, we're forced into committing crimes. That's a lot of people. That's not all people. Some people commit crimes because they're awful. That doesn't mean that we remove their humanity because they're awful. But like, think about like the mass shooters and stuff like that. Those people who commit those crimes, those men who go out and like shoot a bunch of women because they're mad nobody will date them. That's disgusting. And I'm really mad about that. And I want them to be like, get life in prison. But that doesn't mean that I want their humanity to be removed. I think dehumanization is so cruel to do, not just to other people, but it's cruel to do to yourself. To dehumanize another person is cruelness that you are also placing upon yourself. And so to dehumanize large groups of people by saying that they're criminals, that just doesn't make sense to me. Cruelty just begets more cruelty. It doesn't make sense to me. Too many lone wolves in the world. It is a business, Bertie McGill. Yeah. Moral judgment and debt that goes into the history of debt and credit in our world and what a criminal act is and how that is. Ooh. What is that book? That sounds like something I would love to read. Tetsuki, that's also weird. What? That's also weird. Thank you, DJ Melia. That's also weird. I mean, what the hell? Yeah. Have I ever told you that, like, once I had a boyfriend who told me that I only got the scholarship to my college and that I only received high grades because I was black and my teachers felt pity for me, so they elevated my grades? One time my boyfriend said that to me. Isn't that great? I grew up in Kansas. Yeah, just one word wrong or one movement wrong, you would have been screwed, Tetsuki. That's the problem. Also has a free audiobook. Throw the man away. Yeah, definitely throw the man away. Like, it's okay. The man's far gone, but that kind of honestly, I didn't learn to respect myself as a person for a really long time, and a large part of why I didn't learn to respect myself as a person for a really long time is because the people around me didn't respect me. And honestly, even to this day, it's really hard for me to get people to respect me the same way that I see them respecting white people. And I have developed my own self-preservation mechanism in response to this. You guys know, I call people out a lot. I call people out a lot and on a lot of things. And I demand people treat me with respect. And I don't do that out of an inflated sense of pride. I don't do that because I think I'm all uppity and people need to treat me a certain way. I do that because over the course of like the first 22 years of my life, I learned that if you don't demand respect from the people who are treating you with disrespect, if the people who are treating you with disrespect, these people who are diminishing your humanity for no apparent reason, but they're disrespecting you, they don't think you're as human as everybody else. If you don't snap that, if you don't cut that off right where it's happening, those people are going to hurt you. And they're going to hurt you really badly. And they're going to hurt you in ways that they don't intend to. But they're going to, because you can't see somebody as less than human and like be around them and not have them accidentally do something that's going to hurt you in a really bad way. I had to learn that the hard way. And now I don't let people treat me with disrespect, and the people who do, I clap at them, and then if they keep doing it, I don't talk to them anymore. And this is why I do it. It's because I've had, I don't need to get into it, but I've had really bad things happen to me in my life because these people did not see me as fully human. I have been accused of pride by a lot of people over the course of my life, including my family. And I have some pride. But I feel like part of the reason people think that I'm so prideful is because I have this in me, where I have like, you can treat me any way that you want, but I know that I'm not, I know that I'm better than that. And I know I can do better than that. And even to the internal thoughts that are negative in my head, that are running in my head, the script that's been going in my head for my whole life that has been telling me that I can't achieve as much as other people, that if I speak loudly, other people are going to get mad at me. They're going to see me as an angry black woman. These things that are telling me that I'm lesser and that I need to behave in a particular way. I act out against that, and I demand respect against that, to fight back against that. And I think people see that as prideful, but it's not. Unless you need to have pride in order to do that, in which case I do. It's self-preservation. I don't know. That's a thing that I've been thinking a lot about recently. It's something I've been thinking a lot about recently. The backwards logic of the system. Drawing in something from the book, it's like the POC individuals who are seen as criminals no longer deserve the value of human life because they're only bringing down and being a bad example of their race. Oh, thank you, Tetsuki. It's just that people treated me like really badly and it messed me up forever. So now I'm like, don't do that again. Exactly, aggro. Thank you, Melody. Yeah, Riverin, interesting. I feel like I feel like that's a possible perspective to have. I feel like if we're looking, I feel like that's probably more of a perspective that people from within a given race would have rather than people from the outside of a race looking in. I think that, and again, I'm basing off of the knowledge that I had when I was like pretending that I was white when I was growing up. I think that there is an inherent bias growing up in this racial world where you just look at a black person and you don't see them as human as you. I think that that's a mental, like a cognitive bias that we have as a result of growing up the way we have in this world. And that's part of why educating yourself about racism is so important, because it teaches you to humanize people of other races who you might not have been able to have, like, you might not have had the people like that around you growing up. You might not have been introduced to positive examples of them by your family. And you need to expose yourself to people in order to contradict those biases. Connor, thank you for gifting a sub to Shut Up Sprinkles. Sprinkles, welcome back to the fold. Oh, no worries, Sprinkles. It's not just from an experience of being treated as less than. It's also just part of both of my cultures. It's just a part of both of my cultures that we're like, hey, is that a problem? Look at that! Look at that over there! Isn't it weird that we're all just ignoring the problem? Let's talk about it. That's just also a part of my culture and my personality. It makes everything so uncomfortable for everybody else. Alright, so. Sorry, I just went on a bunch of rants there at the end. I didn't need to do that, but that's where I was. America! I am, I wouldn't say that I'm disabled. I'm not as able-bodied as most people. I have some chronic illnesses, and I can't move about very well, as well as I would like. So, in having to grow accustomed to my own limitations, I can understand a portion of what you were saying there. That's, yes. Yeah. It's similar. It's similar. Here, hang on. I'm scrolling through the book. I'm wondering if I was going to read another chapter, which one of them, because, like, I don't need to tell you guys that, biologically speaking, there is no biological difference between the races, right? Can I also just, like, I'm just gonna casually throw this one out there because I fucking hate it whenever I see it. It's not even about racism, it's about sexism. I fucking hate it every time I see it. All this, like, biological differences between men and women, and science says, behavioral scientists say, it makes me want to smack people up the head every time I see them saying that. And you know why? It's because there's no science for behavioral, like, sexism. That's not science. That's people who are seeing differences in the, like, brain or the biology between men and women, and then are extrapolating backwards and being like, oh, we must have evolved this way because women are monogamous and men only want the one woman, and that's why the women who cheat are killed. And but what that I just needed to point that out, that whole system of thinking, of being like, biological differences between men and women create the sociological differences between men and women, and that's why women get paid less. Like, no, that's bullshit. It's all based on backward, like, it's not science. Science is you study something, you have a hypothesis, you do the research, and then you're like, look, I have proof that this thing is true. This is not that. This is, you study something, you do the research, and then you're like, oh, but what if I just say that this is because of that thing? Yeah, that's probably what it is. Sure. It's dumb. It's stupid. I'm gonna bet. You can't argue them. it just goes against everything about humans. There are more differences between individual women's brains than there are between men and women's brains. It's like any two pairs of human brains that you take and compare are different. Men's brains aren't inherently bigger than women's, even though that's a thing. Women don't inherently have like more connective tissue between the brains. Like there are many men who have connective tissue between the hemispheres. It's just a weird stereotype that for some reason exclusively applies to women and doesn't apply. Like, yeah, that is a common trend that you can see, but that doesn't mean that there's no men who also have who have like the connections between the hemispheres, you know? That doesn't mean that there's no women who have larger right hemispheres of their brain than left hemispheres. It's really something how... Sorry, this is because I was scrolling through the chapter on biological racism and how people are like, race is, you know, science says races are different, which is stupid. Okay, I'm calming down. I'm starting just to get, like, ranty. I don't know if that's as educational as not being ranty. Therefore, you must be mega mind. You must be super smart, Zach, and you must be like the most manly male. Oh my god, your brain is so big. So, as a woman, I am biologically programmed to see men with big heads as alphas and superior. Gross. Sorry, I'm just trying to decide whether I want to read an extra chapter real quick. Give me a second to think about this. Oh yeah, you're the known writer of the group, Zach. It's been 3 hours and 20 minutes. Inside burn. I think I won't. I think I won't read anything else, just cause. Tetsuki, thank you for the $10. And you said thanks for being amazing, honest, and vulnerable with us with a smiley face. Aw, no problem. Like I've said, it's the Baby Yoda. Hang on, I'm gonna put some music on. The world talks about a lot of averages. Thank you. Again, I'm just gonna ask because I keep launching into speeches right after I ask this, and I feel like that's not helpful if people are actually wanting to ask questions. But did anybody have any questions that they wanted to have answered, or like points in what we just read that needed clarification, or maybe anything like that? I don't know. I just feel real pumped. I feel like, I don't know, this went really well. So I'm all excited. I'm like, let's keep going. Because I don't know how much of the book I'm allowed to read without getting in trouble. You know what I mean? Considering that, like, it's still under copyright, I'm not actually sure how many pages of the book I can read, and we can discuss legally speaking. Do I think there's more racism towards black women than black men in our society? I think that the racism manifests itself differently for black men and black women in our society. I don't know if I would say that one is more or less racist than the other. Jason, thank you for the host. Thank you. I do also have to pace myself. I say that it's like, so when intersectionality comes into play, it means that people, like, consider like black trans women. Black trans women are going to have it worse than in some ways than black women, and they're going to have it worse in some ways than black men. And that's because of the intersectionality of the trans identity and the female identity, the like woman identity, and the black identity, and the ways that those interact with each other. For example, different cultures will have different ideas of masculinity and femininity, and so betraying those concepts of betraying those concepts of masculinity and femininity, which is what a non-binary identity or a trans identity does, will go over differently in those cultures because of the ideas that were there before. And so just like, woo! Connor donated $20, says, money goes to Cara, enjoy money. Thank you. Is it possible to ask the author for permission? I think I could ask the author for permission. I just didn't try because I didn't think that it would bother. But yeah, so the issues that are going to come up are going to be different because of the ways that racism and sexism and homophobia and thinking that there are only two genders are going to come into play, and they're going to hit you differently. Like, LGBT people might have more resources, but black LGBT people will have less resources, and the issues that are going to be facing like white LGBT people and black LGBT people because of the cultures, like the different ways that you're going to need to come to terms with your LGBT identity if you grew up in a household that shamed LGBT, those can be for very different reasons because of growing up in this white culture or that white culture or this black culture or that black culture. It's kind of the whole concept of intersectionality is that like feminism can't be fighting for the equality of just white women. That's what intersectionality is. Because like black women get lower wages not just because they're women, but also because they're black. So black women get way lower wages than black men do, and then white women do. And that's because of the intersections between both of them. Am I making sense? Terrify me with money. I mean, all right, I'll be down. I'm down. I hope I'm making sense. I didn't build anything up in my head for that, but that is what intersectionality means, is the places where different marginalized identities come to meet, and how oppression will look differently for those people because of those intersecting identities. Yeah, I mean, intersectionality is not inherently bad. It's not inherently bad. You know, like I might be a black woman, but I'm also a light-skinned black woman. So like, I do not get the same level of racism that darker-skinned people do. I don't. And that's because I have this other identity, this light-skinned identity. And I'm also a woman. And those two, like being light-skinned and a woman, will really work in my favor in certain ways because white men still see me as attractive and approachable. And so like police officers are going to be less likely to fuck with me because they can still see, like, they're like, oh, this is a young lady who is attractive to me. And I associate some amount of fragility with your lighter skin. So I'm going to treat you more nicely than you would a darker skinned black woman. But at the same time, I get to deal with weird fucking race fetishists who are super into me because I'm mixed and exotic looking and they're really creepy about it. So like, yeah. What is inherently bad? What is inherently bad is not really anything. Now this is because I'm like a little bit up Buddhism's ass and Taoism's ass, but it's like, for me, it's always been like, people aren't inherently bad. It's what they do that is bad. And I will judge people for their actions. Like if you do certain actions, like I said, I'm quick to judge people. If you disrespect other humans in some way, I'm going to be quick to judge you because I'm going to assume that if you're disrespecting these humans and it's not just like a one-off issue, that you probably have some kind of problem where you're not seeing a certain type of human as fully human, and I don't want to be around you. So I don't like that behavior of you, but that doesn't mean that you're inherently a bad person. That doesn't mean you can't learn to see those people as human later on, and then maybe I will want to be friends with you. I'm not going to condemn you, but I'm going to condemn your actions, and I'm going to condemn you while you're participating in a pattern of behavior. Happy Pride! I just made sense. Oh. Yeah. I knew you meant it semi-sarcastically, but I'm just... Here's an alternative way to think of good and bad that you don't see if you grew up in a Christian household. Happy Pride! Yeah! Where's all me demisexuals? Where's all my pansexuals out there? Who are you? Demisexual Pride! Good. All right, well, I guess I'm gonna end the stream here. Oh, hell yeah, Sprinkles. I guess I'm gonna end it here. I'm like, should I read another? Okay, I'm gonna end it here. And let's see if there's somebody that we can raid. Words are sometimes hard due to having several meanings. That's really true. That's really true. Ooh, I know who we're gonna raid. Let me just make sure that it's not about to end his stream. Ace Pride, yeah! No worries! Thank you guys for being willing to come in and hear my perspective and hear a bunch of definitely hard stuff. Like, thank you for being willing to learn about, like, this aspect of history. I cannot explain. I'm gonna start crying. I'm not gonna cry. It's just such an exciting time to be in after like feeling ignored for so long, to have people like willing to come in. It's really nice. No problem, Riverin. And again, because this is the number, because like, I'm not able-bodied, so I can't go out and protest. One of the ways that I can help people is by talking people through things. So again, if anybody has things that maybe they're confused about that they want to talk about, please feel free to reach out to me. I am, some people don't like having to undertake the emotional labor to have these conversations. I feel like this is a place where I can really help, so I'm okay with that. So if you have problems, let me know. Demi Lovato. I mean, Demi's not bad. She's not bad. Not necessarily 100% my type, but I could get into that. Oh, you guys are so nice and making me feel real good. Oh my god, okay. Well, I'm just emotional. I have a lot of feelings. Alright, so who we're gonna be rating? Oh, that's fair. That makes a lot of sense. That does make sense, Griffin X. So we're going to be rating... And thank you guys for doing a lot as well. We're going to be rating Overlord Devon. A black creator. I've rated him before. I've played, if you guys, I don't know if any of you were around, I played Dragon Quest Builders 2 with him in like a group stream with Todd. So we shall rate him. There is an egg emote, yeah! You have to donate bits. I'm sorry, I'm an affiliate, so I don't get enough emote slots, so it's only for bits, but... yeah, and you can check out the archives too. Okay. Get ready for the raid. If you have chair dances, get your chair dances ready. If you have another thing, then use that instead. Again, thank you guys so much for coming. This was actually really nice, and I was really nervous about it, but it went super well, and you all are great, lovely humans, and I appreciate you. And just a healing experience for me. Okay, we're gonna go for the raid in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Bye.